Who's the rival of the RB?
2J, yeah.
2J, right. So I think the RB is by far the better engine. It's 90% visual. And that's why so many people get away with building cars. But still, oh, that guy's the best. No, his engine bay is shiny.
You're crazy.
Shiny engine bays don't mean A lot of guys here in Florida have this much confidence. The skill level won't show up on the camera. And we'll drive one of those cars today. I have one with me.
Tell us on the Street Alpha podcast who you feel is the king of RBs in Florida.
I have to give it to Larry.
Let's say street cars.
I would say I am. I'm one of the few guys in the States who cares about streetability stuff.
If you love the Street Alpha podcast, check out our exclusive GTR hoodies and t-shirts that are now available on the site. Hit the link below to get yours today.
Welcome back to another episode of the Street Alpha podcast. I'm your host, Tukes, and today we are in Florida again. We're always in Florida, and the biggest reason why we're in Florida is because I actually just moved here about a month ago. So I know in the last episode I mentioned that I was going to be moving to Florida from New York. I've been in New York my whole life. And now we are living in Florida. And honestly, I can say I love it. I don't know why I didn't leave a lot sooner, but we're here. So one of the main reasons that we're here is because I'm building a car. I'm building an RB in the Mark V Supra. Prior to me working on this project, I had been in talks with Roberto of Rap Performance. So through our conversations on WhatsApp, which we speak, I realized that he's a super knowledgeable guy. So Roberto is a builder of a lot of street RBs, right? A lot of fast, functional street RBs, right? He also is involved in tuning the 4GT, which is the world's fastest street car, technically, right? A street car, not salt flats like you mentioned before,
Correct, yeah.
right? It goes 300 miles or plus 310 miles per hour, and you can drive it back home to your garage.
With
right?
AC?
Right, with AC. So before we begin, we will have some included driving clips as well. We're going to be driving some of Roberto's cars that he's worked on and built. We'll have some stock RBs, and then we'll have some built ones. And then apparently you have one from another shop.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I don't do this often, but
Yeah.
some of the work we get is redos from their shops.
Right.
And even though I typically say no, if you butter me up enough and you give me a good enough sob story, then sure, I'll help you out. But I happen to have the perfect example of the wrong way to do these cars.
Okay.
And I haven't touched it yet.
Right.
So it's as is. So we'll go for a spin.
Really curious to see how that drives. And I don't think I've only driven one stock RB, and that was from Dre. Shout out to JDM Dre. But aside from that, I've never really driven one that was built or tuned or anything like that. So I'm really curious to see how they feel. But before we begin, let's give a round of applause for Roberto of Rap Performance.
Thank you.
I always have to have the clapping in there, of course, even though there's nobody in here.
Do I have to clap?
No, you're fine.
Okay,
You're fine. You're fine. I just add claps.
Oh,
That's cool, man. Yeah. So your motto, every time I've spoken to you, your thing has been just building a really functional street car. Now, with these RBs, it's an iconic platform, right? And most people, when they hear them, they hear the turbo noises, the flutters, all the crazy things you can do with them. But it just seems like a lot of people don't really know how to actually build these cars and make them fun on the street. You see a lot of big turbo things, and a lot of things you see on social media are cars that are 80 mil turbos and breaking records. But what about when you want to just drive one and you want to purchase one and pick one up and build one and not have a car that's going 6 seconds down the track, right? So your thing is building functional street cars, right?
Correct.
So before we get into that, I kind of want to have a little bit of a background of who you are and how you came up with the name RAV for Rap Performance.
My initials.
Oh, it's your initials.
Yeah. I actually had a dramatically more interesting name.
Okay.
And the website was too expensive.
What was it?
I couldn't remember. I'd have to go back and look at my notes. It's somewhere in the little thing. So the company actually is called, if you look me up on Sunbiz, it's actually RAV Advisors.
RAV Advisors.
Advisors, yeah, that's the core name. In Florida, you can do fictitious names.
Really?
So RAV Performance is like the shop version of it. Originally, what we did is we kind of supplied shops with like knowledge and bases and stuff like that. That's the core of it.
Yeah.
So like shops would pay me to come in and kind of be the guy that would like organize things and like make things happen and kind of follow recipes and that stuff. And then that didn't work out because things in life like that don't work out.
Yeah.
And then I just went solo, just instead of being like a helper for other shops, I just did my own thing, and it's worked out.
It's funny because I think that's the first thing I noticed when speaking to you was like, oh, this guy is super knowledgeable. Like you definitely have a certain way of speaking and kind of explaining. So that's one of the biggest things. I could definitely see you doing that kind of role.
If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be like a scientist or something.
Yeah.
I highly believe in like the scientific method, and like I'm not a hearsay guy. I just don't like it. I like to, if I can't prove it, it's not real.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. So I take that and apply it to cars.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like you have this thing where it's like, if you haven't tried it, you're not going to sit here and speak about something you haven't done. Or if somebody, I know you mentioned before, like, prove it. Like this is, if you feel something's better or something works, then prove it to me. And
Yeah. I speak in absolutes about very little.
Okay.
Just because at the end of the day, like a lot of things are impossible to prove.
Yeah. Right.
But if I have enough data to consistently keep trying and experiment over and over again and getting the same results, then I'd like to acknowledge that it's probably the truth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I also, I hopefully other people would too.
Right.
That's how I look at it.
Right.
Yeah.
So now when it comes to building a functional street car, right? There's some things that come to mind when I'm thinking about that. And the first thing, of course, is turbo, right? That's one of the first things I think about, at least. Maybe other people would think differently. They may have a different format of thinking how they, want to build their car structure, or maybe it could be how they want to spend their money, right? So when it comes to a turbo, right, let's just start there. Is it possible? I mean, obviously you can have a turbo that's too big for the street, right? Now, where do you feel like your setups or your builds lie at in terms of turbo sizing?
So don't think turbo. It's a different T word. That's the important thing.
Okay.
It's torque.
Torque.
That's all it is.
See?
So you take a factory car, I put on the dyno, right? A Skyline. I'll have to go back and look because I'm horrible at numbers, even though I do this all day.
That's
a
cool.
stock Skyline typically produces about 150 foot-pounds of torque before 2,000 RPM.
Okay.
Right. So if I sit there at 1,500, 2,000 RPM, steady state, hold it, peg it, let it boost up, it's making 150 foot-pounds of torque.
Okay.
Right? There's your baseline. Anything less of that is not a street car, or it's less than stock. Anything above that is better. So you just hunt for torque. It's a number. It's a static number.
Yeah.
So as long as you look at where torque was and then is, that's your comparison. And we'll go for a spin in a car with below stock torque,
Okay.
and above stock torque, and you're going to be like, mind you, your baseline is going to be a stock car,
Right.
and you're going to be like, whoa, I get it, and that's it. So then you start talking about turbo. Will this turbo get me this torque?
Okay.
And now you've produced a street car, because now in theory, if you look at a stock car, that's your baseline.
Okay.
Anything worse than that is worse than that. So if you can stay at that or better and make 800 horsepower,
Yeah.
that's what we do. So it's that torque value, that low end mid torque value that I never ever compromise on, unless we're talking about 1,000+ horsepower.
Right.
Right. So 800 horsepower on a 26, I can give you better than stock spool. So at no point in that power band do you have a car that makes less power than a stock car would. So it never feels slower than a stock car, even at red lights, 2,000 RPM, whatever. And then if we want to start doing that with the 1,000 horsepower club, now we're going to RB30 status, because we just need that stroke to just keep ourselves there.
Right. So now I'm thinking, you're telling me about torque and all that stuff, right? So now in my head, I'm thinking, okay, then I have to probably reduce the size of the turbo to get that to spool up faster and bring in the boost sooner, right? Well, you can do that with a bigger turbo. However, it'd probably be easier to do it with a smaller turbo, technically.
So this is where it gets tricky.
Okay.
Because people look at turbos wrong, right?
Okay.
So let's look at it like this. So if I want 800 horsepower,
Okay.
right? Do I go buy the turbo that at 90% efficiency is giving me 800 horsepower?
True.
Or do I go buy the one that's going to give me 1,200 horsepower, only use 50% of it? And then obviously I made the number on the dyno,
Yeah.
right? But what did I sacrifice?
Right. Right.
And that comes from a very like an old school tuning method. And what it is it's going to sound like I'm dissing people. I'm not. This is just something I've noticed.
Yeah.
As someone who owns a dyno and
Let us know,
baselines
man.
cars and does this all day, I
we're here
see
for
it
man.
enough to say, hey, this happens, right?
Yeah. Right.
People are terrified of engine efficiency,
Okay.
with i.e. timing. And then they have this really weird speculation about AFR, right? So in most people's minds, if they want to make 800 horsepower, they can run the 1200 horsepower turbo,
Okay.
not touch the timing table, right? Because most of these ECUs now come with some sort of a base map, right?
Right.
So now you made the power, you're down 6 degrees of timing, which by itself is going to equal 150, 200 horsepower when you're talking about these kinds of numbers,
Jeez.
right?
Yeah.
But the turbo is big enough where you can make the boost.
Right.
So you make the power, right?
Yeah.
It says 800 on the dyno, right? With an oversized turbo, your EGTs through the roof, and the cherry on top, lean is mean. So then right, you've heard that, right? Yeah. And then so you have these motors, and people wonder like why they're grenading. It's not so much of a problem nowadays because everybody's going to be on ethanol or something.
Right.
But on pump gas,
Yeah.
at a certain, you can pull timing all you want to prevent knock or whatever, however you want to look at it. But at a certain point, man, once your cylinder temps get to a certain point, you're done.
Right.
Your plugs are hot. Everything's hot. When in your adventures of building the engines, have you ever heard of people taking the edges off?
The edges off?
Yeah. So you always want to take edges off, sharp edges in a cylinder.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
You do that to prevent hot spots because those little hot
Ah.
spots are actually going to cause detonation, right? So
Interesting.
But it's based on cylinder temperature.
Right.
So as long as you keep your cylinder temperature down, right, it doesn't happen. So how do you keep your cylinder temperatures down? More fuel, more timing.
More fuel, more timing. Okay. Now, what is an optimal range for timing especially with this platform? Because that seems to be the one thing that you really can't just type in on Google or YouTube and look up. That's something that I think is something that you have to go through with experience. Like you have to learn that through experience of build or timing a ton of these cars or tuning them. So where's the optimal timing range for these cars? Or is that something that's like a secret sauce to everybody's?
No, go find one of my cars at a car show, plug into it, take my map. I could care less.
Okay.
I'm not that guy.
Okay.
You paid me for the ECU. You paid me for the map. You paid me for my time.
Yeah.
It belongs to you, not to me.
Okay.
I don't care. 800 horsepower car, 85. It depends on the setup. Where you're gonna have a efficient timing window of like 20 to 24 degrees.
Okay.
And a lot of that depends on what you're doing. If you're on really good quality ethanol, you can get really, really kind of crazy with it. At a certain point, you stop making power, but what happens is your EGTs go down.
So you keep mentioning EGTs. Now, I was thinking about running those on my setup, but everybody was just like, well, from not everybody, but a lot of people were like, you don't need that. You're not drag racing. Now, do you use that more so for data, or is it just something you must have to kind of know?
It's data and engine protection.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. If I throw timing at an engine and it's not making any more power, but my EGTs are going down, I'm doing good to the engine.
Okay.
Right. So what? This is gonna get nerdy.
No, it's cool, man. Yeah.
What
I'm here for it.
is the only factor that determines whether an engine survives or not? There's only one factor in an engine that determines if it survives or not.
One factor?
There's only one factor. Every way, shape, or form an engine can fail always boils down to one factor, whether it's the chemistry of it or the other aspects of failure. Temperature. Another T word.
Okay, so temperature. All right. You kind of spoke about that already. Right.
So it's all temperature based. What's your oil doing?
Like
What's the purpose of the oil in the engine? What's it doing in there?
To reduce friction.
To reduce friction, right? Because you have metal parts that are trying to literally grind into each other.
Right.
Right. You have globules of oil which separate it.
Right.
Right. And they don't let the metal pieces touch. That's it. But what you're doing there is you're stopping friction from happening.
Which creates heat, right?
Which creates heat, which then, there's your bearing, right? Same thing in the combustion chamber, right? I think it was on your podcast. I heard, maybe I dreamt this. It's possible I dreamt this. Tell me.
No, it's okay.
I heard someone mention that like all modern cars, even with big horsepower, like only run like one AFR value, storage 14.7 or something. Like even
wasn't my podcast.
They can run super, super lean and that. And I started cracking up. I'm like, what drugs is this guy? He said he was claiming that like 1,000 horsepower car could run a storage 14.7, and they come like that from factory. with like 800 horsepower boost, all this stuff, impossible.
Yeah.
The point of fuel, right, in an engine, or overfueling past storage, right, is to keep the temperatures down. The fuel's job is to cool the cylinder, right? Why is it that we all don't run only one fuel?
In general?
In general. Because one fuel's better than the next.
Okay.
E85 is technically less efficient than pump gas, than petrol.
E85 is less efficient?
100%.
Why is that? Explain.
You need more of it to get the same result.
You need 30% more, right? Apparently.
But that 30% more means 30% more cooling. That's the point of it. And then you need more if you're talking about methanol. Why do they run methanol? It's just cooling. You're using the fuel to cool the engine. The cooler the engine runs, the more timing you can put through it, the more efficient it becomes, the more power you make. That's all it is. So it all goes back to temperature. So if you can keep up with temperature and keep track of it, then technically speaking, as long as the hardware is good, things can live for a very long time.
Right.
You know, and there's very obvious indications that you have an inefficient engine. Are you changing your spark plugs all the time?
Yeah.
Is your car dying when it gets like a little bit heat soaked or had red lights?
Okay.
And then even like the little things like, is it starting up nice? Is doing all these things, right?
Yeah.
Why does your car not want to start up when it's cold?
I feel like I should know this. Is this a common thing?
Because it's a super fine dance of calculations. Too much fuel cools the cylinder down too much, won't burn, floods it. But it's very easy to overfuel. So what happens is everyone's had this, or not everyone, no, not my cars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Your cold start fueling isn't right.
Okay.
So there's all these like, these little isms and all this stuff that just play a role in how cars behave. But it's not like as difficult as people make it seem sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's all fuel, man. It's all how it works and how it burns and how it doesn't and all this stuff. And
is that universal for all your cars, or it just depends on different things, injectors and so on?
We have a cool luxury of kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So for us, we have a base map for every setup that's gonna just it's there.
Right.
We don't, when we go to start up a car for the first time, we don't go like, oh, is it going to start and run nice? No, it's just going to start and run nice because it's the same fucking injectors, the same pistons, the same cam, the same everything as the last 10. You know, so we know that it's going to start up.
Right.
But when you start, getting into different setups and stuff like that, no, there's corrections that have to be made.
Okay.
And that's like, for example, that's one of the reasons with the tunes we do. People laugh at me all the time. I go, drop the car off on Monday, pick it up on Friday. What do you mean? I just need a tune. I'm like, what? Yeah, that's how that works. What do you think? I'm doing this in 45 minutes?
Yeah.
Well, the last guy did it in 45 minutes. Well, that's what you're calling me now.
Yeah.
No shit, dude. Like, if you want the nice cold starts and you want all that stuff, you have to take the time. And you only get certain shots at it, and that's just part of it. But yeah, it's temperature. Temperature. I guess that's where we came from. Temperature. It's all temperature. Whether it starts up nice, whether it lasts, whether it doesn't. It's all based on temperature.
Now, what are some of the ways aside from EGTs that you can kind of monitor that to make sure that your engine is running at optimal temperatures?
I think EGT is a huge thing. I know a lot of people don't do it because it's not really like a value that necessarily matters for tuning.
Yeah.
Like it's a I don't know what the wording is. English isn't my first language. I apologize, but it's not crucial. It just, for me at least, it just tells me if I'm going in the right direction.
Okay.
So it's backup data.
Got you.
It solidifies that everything's good, and then on top of it, the cherry on top is it's awesome engine protection.
Right.
So if you have a car with EGTs and it's idling, we'll call it 800 degrees. Every cylinder is at 800 degrees, and you're staring at the computer, and you go and you unplug a coil pack or unplug an injector. I can be like, hey, why did you unplug number 3? Because there's a dramatic change.
Yeah, there's a dramatic. Yeah. Right.
So if injector number 6 is acting up or number 2 or something, and you don't realize it, when we do a pull and and cylinder 2 is 300 degrees away from the other ones, there's something there.
Yeah.
You know, we just had a big JZ not too long ago come through, and one of the EGTs was not with the rest of them. Do a compression test, that cylinder's hurt.
Damn.
Had we kept going, the hurt cylinder, no big deal. This is, you know, it's a big boy car.
Right.
It's going to break, right? This is just take it out, refresh it, put it back in, $5,000 tops.
Damn.
Had we not caught that $5,000 will turn to 50 real quick.
So what was wrong with it? It was just like a...
It hasn't been torn apart yet.
Okay,
yeah, it was like
okay.
right at the end of the season, so it was just one of those things
Yeah.
where, like, you know, it's one of these projects that's just
Yeah.
keeps restarting once a year,
Right,
you know, and
I
it never
got
really
you.
hasn't really gone anywhere too crazy, but you that information lets you catch that.
Okay.
You know? The car did overperform,
Right.
so it doesn't owe the owner anything, you know, because that's the thing with this stuff too. People often, you know, think that race cars last forever.
Yeah.
They don't. They have a purpose.
Right.
You know, you need to set a goal, make it realistic. You know, build a car, run 9s, cool. Didn't break, cool. Run 8s, cool. Okay, did it break? Yes. Did it meet your goal? Yes. Doesn't owe you anything.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's true.
That's how it works.
That is true.
If you want to race, you need to show up with 3 motors and this and that, you know.
Yeah.
If you want 800 horsepower street cars, those you can make them last forever.
Yeah.
But if you want to actually be the guy that shows up and is on the podium and or is impressing people,
Yeah.
you got to show up with spares. It's just the name of the game, you know.
Now, how do you know if now obviously we were talking about turbos and temperature and then timing and so on, but how do you know if you're running too much timing? Is it basically when you're running out of when you're not making any more power on the dyno, or
So it depends on the fuel quality. That's all it really is, right?
Okay.
So if you're running on like low octane pump gas, eventually you're going to start detonating. You know?
Okay.
It's just too much timing. It's if you're running on good quality ethanols or even pump. I mean, here in Florida, usually the pump is over E70.
I know it's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So we're spoiled with really good quality fuels. So it's kind of, it doesn't matter too much.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that. It does matter, but you don't have to stress out as much about it.
Okay.
On pump gas, it's really easy though. You have just a good knock sensor. So if we don't build very, very many cars that are going to be ran aggressive on pump gas.
Okay.
On those cars, what we do is we upgrade, at least on the 26 and also in 2Js actually, we just upgrade to like a modern Bosch knock sensor.
Okay.
And you know, as long as you're using a decent ECU that has good knock control, which we do, you know,
Right.
it's just set your knock points, make sure that it makes sense, right? Because false knock is a real thing, and you just sit there and you tune based on that, and then you follow the old school rule of, you know, you add timing until it stops making power or it knocks, and then you roll it back.
Okay.
You know, and then we add another layer on top, which is then we set our knock threshold a little below that.
Okay.
And then based on that specific environment on the dyno, right, anything past those thresholds has some sort of correction.
Okay.
So for example, if we're doing pools on the dyno and our intake air temps are, we'll call it 115, right? I don't start making intake air temp corrections at 130 because I haven't tested that level. I'll start
Right.
doing them at 120.
Okay.
I'll start pulling a little bit of timing there because what's the point?
Right.
You know?
Right.
So now you have the system itself already adjusting to things leaving that threshold. And then you have the background safety, knock control, stuff like that also doing its job. You mix that with, what's it called? With the other engine protections, AFR,
Right.
you know, fuel pressure, blah, 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 blah. It's really hard to hurt the motor at that point.
Yeah.
Because you have so many layers keeping things in check.
In check.
Yeah.
Right. Now, one thing I've heard is that some people don't even run knock sensors. Right. Now,
Yeah.
is this something that you kind of implement only because you're building functional street cars, or this is something that should be implemented across all, you know, types of racing?
You can't set up and tune knock sensors properly in 45 minutes.
Okay.
So if you're a 45-minute tuner, throw that shit out because it's going to give you nothing but headaches for the first hour that you're there, because you need to figure out how that system's resonating. The size of the piston changes the frequency. A knock sensor is a microphone. That's all it is.
Okay.
Right, just a microphone. Issue is you have to figure out at what frequency the engine knocks. The frequency changes depending on piston size, depending on... dude, I've had like clutches that make noise and it looks like knock. you have to sit there and figure out what is and isn't knock and all this stuff. And my dyno, it's pretty simple because I can do steady state.
Okay.
So I can literally sit there and, you know, put a car at like a safe load, 3,500 RPM, something, turn the boost all the way down, shove an excessive amount of timing down its throat, let it knock for 2-3 seconds, right? And then take a snapshot of that, right? And read the frequencies and then determine, okay, I heard actual knock. I physically heard the engine knock. The ECU told me that it knocked. Therefore, this is my knock window. If I see this in the ECU, there's a problem. If my knock sensor's freaking out while I'm idling,
Yeah.
you know, that's not the frequency I'm going for. So you have to sit there and wind it down and figure it out, you know, and then once you have that number, you do something with it.
Interesting. Yeah, because I've heard a lot about knock sensors.
But it takes effort, man. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. It takes forever. But again, drop the car off on Monday, pick it up on Friday. Right.
I got you. Okay. So now when it comes to picking your injectors for, you know, your setup, right? Streetcar, the streetcar format. Now, 1,000 cc, should we be at 2,000, which they 2,200?
In modern times, it's basically irrelevant. Okay. Modern injectors. I mean, obviously, if I could put an injector in everything, it'd be an IDX. Because they're stainless and they're awesome, and you know, yada yada yada. But our go-to injector for the most part for RBs is a Bosch. I forget what the actual part number of it is, but it's a Bosch-based injector that essentially Fuel Injector Clinic does their thing too,
right?
And then makes little adapters, and they're awesome because they use the exact same connector as a factory RB. So they're plug-in. Oh,
nice.
There's no drama. There's no cutting. There's no splicing. It just plugs in. Those come in two versions, 1,200 and 1,650.
Okay.
I can get stock like drivability from both.
Wow.
So it doesn't really matter.
Are there any injectors where you can't get stock drivability?
Yes. There's a ton of injectors out there that you can't. That's why we're extremely picky with injectors. Some of the bigger decas are really annoying. Okay. They don't like to pull slow. There's a couple of different Bosches that that flow phenomenally up top, but have a very hard time down low. So what happened is I actually had one of these cars recently do this. If the fuel pressure gets too high, it won't physically open. That's annoying. So what happens is if the ECU isn't asking it to move or to open up enough, and the fuel, like you're going into boost and you get into this funny area where it's not quite demanding that much fuel, but the fuel pressure is going up because you're going into boost,
right?
It'll literally just not fire. It just can't physically overcome it. Yeah, you'll have like little issues like that with like some of the, these are old injectors. This is the stuff that was being used like 10 years ago, but you still see them. Yeah, because they are an off the shelf thing from Bosch that you can buy.
Okay,
I forget the name of them, but they're not great, you know. But so we stick with FICs, the 1200s, 1650s, and then anything ID makes is going to be great. So, you know, like GT, ID 2600s, two sets. So it's two stages of 2600s.
Oh, this is on IDs?
And it idles like stock car.
Wow.
And I have.
Wait, hold on. 2600 idles like a stock car. How? How are you getting, because I've heard you don't want to have an injector too big because it's going to affect the drivability of the car and idling.
That depends.
Okay.
So remember how we talked about earlier about like fueling and startups and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Okay. So look at it like this, ready? If I have a 500cc injector, right, and I'm making up numbers, none of this is actually going to make any sense. I'm just doing it for math's sake, right? And I need 1,000 cc of fuel flow to get the car to idle, right? I have a 20% window of travel.
Okay.
Big number.
Yeah.
If I were to quadruple or double that injector, now I have a 10% window of travel. If I were to quadruple it, now I have a 5% window of travel. See how that window gets smaller and smaller and smaller?
Right.
And the issue is now, it's called injector linearization. Injectors are linear from a certain point on, typically.
Okay.
They're not linear in the beginning. And I believe it or not, I have a $15,000 injector machine over there. I can actually show you all this stuff if you want to see it.
Yeah.
So what happens is as you get closer and closer and closer to that level that you have to pulse that injector to run, it becomes more and more difficult. So that's why a big injector is going to be harder to control than a small injector. And that's it. That's just the only reason behind it. And it gets worse and worse and worse as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then depending on the injector's characteristics, before that point of linearization,
Yeah.
It gets more and more difficult. So if you have a cheap injector, actually I shouldn't call it cheap injector. If you have an injector not designed for that, that hasn't been engineered to pulse low, you're just gonna have a hard time. And especially the smaller the engine, right? Because it takes this much fuel to fill up the cylinder on that 5.4 liter, whatever the hell it is.
Right.
And it takes this much fuel, thank you, buddy. That's very nice of you. I was getting a little dry. And it takes this much fuel to get the same results on a SR20.
Right.
So yes, 2600
on
this doable, 2600 on SR20, no.
Okay.
Because you're just you will never get that injector to flow low enough.
Right.
But it isn't an exact science like people make it be. Like, oh yeah, if you put a big injector in it, it's never going to run right. No, potentially won't run right depending on the characteristics of the injector and the demand of fuel of that engine.
Right.
So I've had this a million times where the threshold's really, really small.
Yeah.
And I can get a car to idle perfectly on E85, but not on pump gas. Because remember, E85 is 30% more.
Right.
So it just gets above that threshold where I have full control over it. And then you put pump gas in the car. Now it tries to lean it out to the point where the injector can't quite keep up.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I understand.
And that's where you start. What's happening there is it's having a hard time maintaining stable fuel. So it goes lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich. And that's where you get all those, inconsistencies.
Okay. Nobody's ever explained it. I've always tried to ask this question and I never get like a just straight to the point answer. Like it's always some other stuff or like it's just like I never get like
because people just see something online or something and then it becomes their law, Yeah. I see something and I bought a $15,000 injector fucking machine to test the stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So now I understand.
I'm just a nerd that happens to like cars.
There may be some people.
You should see my other hobbies.
There may be some people though who probably think differently, but who knows? There's very limited knowledge on or information out there on fuel. It's one of the things that like I feel like you have to have a lot of money to really do R&D on, or just really spend hours, days trying to figure things out.
That is out there. It's just usually coming from boring avenues.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm serious.
Yeah.
It's
right.
This is like my issue with like some of like the YouTube and like Instagram and stuff like that. It's like, dude, the crap people say, and but if you say it with confidence, it's true.
Yeah, that's true.
Apples are blue.
No, it's true.
Most people won't believe it, but you get a couple of them.
Yeah,
and they fucking run with it.
No, it's true.
That's what it's about. That's just how the community is, though.
Yeah,
it's just very easy to convince people of stuff if if it's shiny enough.
Yeah,
if it glitters, it's gold.
No, I get it. I sometimes you don't even know like if because of the confidence if it's true, but it kind of for me at least it makes me think about it and say maybe I'll do some more research rather than just see something and believe it.
Yeah, and a lot of it too is just depends on how the person presents it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
I mean, I'll give you an example of like somebody who just like this is usually the smartest guy in the room, Jay Muir.
Yeah.
RS Garage, or it used to be Real Street.
Right.
How do I know that guy is the smartest guy in the room? Because he doesn't tell me he is, like, at all. Those words have never come out of his mouth. But he sure as hell shows it.
No, Jay is definitely a smart dude for sure. Like 1,000%. And he has a way of like kind of the way how he presents himself is just like and he listens too.
Yep.
That's the biggest thing I noticed. He's not one of those people just trying to shove information down your throat. It's like he listens to what you're saying and then he kind of assesses it and then gives his explanation as to why you either wrong or right.
Yeah. And you have to do it that way because if not, what ends up happening is you get stuck in this little rut where you just make your own little fantasy world.
Yeah.
And sure, you can have yes men, which a lot of people do, but you don't get anywhere.
Right.
You have to always be in this like mentality where you're looking to do things different. Not for the sake of it, right? But just because there might be something better.
Yeah.
Like what I tell my guys is, is we need to always look back at what we were doing last year and go, why?
Right.
Because every year, there needs to be, it has to be better, and better and better and better.
Right.
I think the last couple of years, like wiring has been a big thing for us. Wiring used to be just kind of like simplicity. you know, and then I started joining a bunch of those like mil spec wiring like Facebook groups
Yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
and those guys made me look like an idiot, and I was like, fuck. So I went out and bought all the stuff to do the fancy wiring harnesses. So now we do fancy wiring harnesses, you know, but you know, it's just there's always something.
Right. So one of the things that when it comes down to building RBs is you know, RPM, right? These are to me the best sounding engines probably on the planet. Who knows? I'm sure there's some other ones. You know, you got some weird combinations. They got like 5 rotors and things like that. If you're into rotaries, I think the RB is the best sounding by far, right? And then second, I go 2J, or I'm sorry, 1J, 1J, I would say. Now, one of the things is that a high RPM would probably make the car sound a lot better, right? I'm assuming. Now, with that high RPM, you have to run a proper valve train to support this, right? So now, what are some of the things that you feel work best when you want to rev high? Or is there like something that you would prefer to run to rev high?
I mean, the basics of that question would just be springs, obviously. So valves floating are your
right.
What dictates how much you can rev from like the head perspective.
Right.
Right. With RBs, they have an Achilles heel, which is they have a shim on their bucket design.
Right.
And the shims are huge. So they like to float. And when they float, what they'll do is they'll wedge themselves. If you look at an RB, the exhaust side of the RB is a little bit slanty. Right. So gravity dictates. So what happens is if the bucket were to ever separate from the valve, that little shim in there has the ability to wedge itself. Once it wedges itself, your exhaust valve gets stuck open ever so slightly. You know, and it'll happens if you're. It usually happens from rev limiters. Yeah. Aggressive rev limiters. Right. You know, so if you're like 2-stepping or hit rev limiter or something like that, and all of a sudden your car is making, you know, no vacuum and it's running like crap, you floated a shim. You know, many times have people said, "Oh, the motor's blown," and I go and it's a shim. Yeah, you know, and you can pop the cam out, pop it back in, and just be careful. We used to have a solution for that back when there wasn't very many shimless options. Okay, what we would do is we would actually run a. Are you familiar with like cam base circles and modifying them to get more lift and stuff like that?
Yeah, so technically, if you want it, from my understanding with this stuff, is if you want to run a higher lift, you have to reduce the base circle to get the cam to sit lower. So you can
right. So keep in mind, right? So they sell buckets for that. Okay. Right. So if you have a smaller base circle, right now you need more shim. Right. So what they do is they sell buckets that have a little mini shim built into it that makes up for it. So in other words, you can use this setup and keep the same everything. You don't have to actually sit there and do it. Right. So what we did is we actually ran that bucket, but we ran it with a stock base circle cam. Okay. And we took and it was a mil difference. So what we would do is we would take the mil out of the shim. Got you. So I think if I'm not mistaken, every single RB comes shimmed with a 2.55 millimeter shim from factory. Okay. And then the valve gets ground to accommodate, and then you adjust from there if needed with different shims. But on average, 2.55. So what we did is we just put in 1.55s. So it essentially cut the weight of the shim down. Yeah. Right. And it made it so it didn't actually protrude past the keeper, the spring retainer. Right. So we did that. I think we probably put 12, 13 motors out in the world like that. All of them crazy. Not all of them, but most of them crazy. Yeah. North 800 horsepower. You know, north 85, 8600 RPM red lines, you know, and we never had an issue.
And how much lift are you running on these setups?
Not much at all.
Not much at all.
I don't run a lot of lift.
So do you believe in running high amounts of lift, or do you feel like that's something that if you're drag racing, you're going into pushing higher numbers and things like that? No.
Nope. I mean, there's a certain point. You know, if you said to me, "Hey, we're building a 1500 horsepower RB," then we're getting into some serious cams. But just like we talked about that 1200 horsepower turbo for 800 horsepower earlier, why? It doesn't make any sense, you know? Yeah. And I see it happen all the time. People just throw the catalog at these things. They put these huge cams in these things, and then they don't want to start. They build no vacuum, so your brakes don't work. You know, they make no torque at idle. So you turn your AC on, the thing's always dying. So now you have to jack up your idle more and more and more and more to get the thing to stay alive, which then lowers and lowers and lowers your vacuum. So you get, like I said, again, no brakes, no nothing. The car doesn't want to start. You get horrible MPG, you know? And the worst part about it is because your cams are so aggressive, you can't do the most important thing that you do to an engine, which is set your valve overlap.
Mm.
No valve overlap means no spool.
Interesting.
Which
So-
when we go for a spin, one of the cars we're going to take, two of the cars we're going to take out are a V-cam.
Okay. Yeah.
Behind me.
Which is a common thing for the intake. What's the intake side, right?
Yeah, V-cam's cool because I can adjust it, so I can show you what the car is like without it, and with it I can turn it on and off. So it's really interesting. But all that does is it just increases valve overlap.
Okay. So what does that do for drivability?
Well, valve overlap. I don't want to get too into the science of it because it's a little bit of a strange concept to grasp. But valve overlap essentially causes the turbo, again, very simplistic here, causes the turbo to spool up faster.
Okay.
But as RPM increases, it makes the engine a little less efficient.
Now, valve overlap, you mean when both valves are open?
Yeah.
Okay.
What happens is on a turbo engine, especially on a turbo engine, when everything's under pressure and both valves ever so slightly open, you get what's called scavenging.
Okay.
And what scavenging done is it just wicks away
Right.
all the excess from the cylinder.
Okay.
So it's, both valves open, there's pressure goes through, cylinder is clean, everything, closes, intake valve opens up, everything's nice and fresh in there.
Right.
So you do that, and that effect causes a lot of magic in the cylinder, magic in the turbo, and you get a faster spooling setup.
Does that any of that have to do with chop? A valve overlap?
So valve overlap is what causes traditional chop. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And we have we make it more aggressive with some tuning strategies and stuff like that, and we use the V cams to really get them real choppy because people like it.
Yeah.
So, and I like it too. I think when you build cars, especially for fun, right? Not for like a dedicated event or like a track or something, but when you're taking the car to car shows and you're meeting up with your friends on the weekends and you're doing this and this, rolling up and the car having a cool sound to it.
It sounds good. I think it's cool.
Just part of the experience,
right?
And we have it set up where it's a button.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we put ghost cam buttons in.
Oh, that's pretty.
So
dope.
you can shut it off. So if it gets annoying, you can just shut it off.
That's pretty cool.
Not everyone asks for it. Some people just want it on all the time. But
I want to have the cool sounds and stuff like that. It's pretty cool. I feel like it's nice to have that kind of stuff. If you're not like at the track drag racing your car, it's kind of nice to have different things you can have. If you want to go to a car show, you can do that. You want to race in the street, roll race, whatever, you have options.
It's 90% visual. And that's why so many people get away with building shit cars. But still, oh, that guy's the best. No, his engine bay is shiny.
Yo, you crazy.
Trust me, shiny engine bays don't mean shit. You know what I mean? That's what it is.
Oh, man. Yo. So I have a question about the valves, right? So now having your RPM set higher, right? Your engine won't live as long, and having it set a little lower, you increase the longevity of,
technically speaking,
of the engine, right? So now where do you feel like these sit comfortably where you can have a nice sounding RB, but also have the reliability of it? Or not even reliability, because people will argue that it's not a reliable platform, but longevity for the most part.
So going back to our recipes with stock like or better spool, and 800 horsepower. So the 800 horsepower setup that we do, we can rev it past 9 if we wanted to.
If you wanted to, right?
So I start losing the ability to keep torque flat around 8,400. So I typically set the red line to 86.
Okay.
And tell people to shift at 84 if you're driving that car hard. But our power band starts in the 3,600 RPM range.
Now, is it possible, like, would there be any benefits aside from sound maybe? Because I guess at that point, anything past that, you'd probably be falling off, right? So maybe if you have a bigger turbo, like what would affect you having or needing to go with the high RPM?
It's turbo. It's turbo related, right? So obviously you can make more horsepower up top. And I think in Jay's world, where it's basically drag racing, and in order to get dogs, in order to get the ETs, you need horsepower. Right. So in that world, yes, you run monstrous turbo and you run all this stuff, and it is laggy. But, and especially if we're talking about an automatic car, you only need to spool once. Right? You never let off the throttle. And then it's usually an automatic transmission. So what ends up happening is you're spraying off the line, you're getting on chip, right? That's what I use that term, but it's what people used to call two-step.
Oh, really?
I just the word two-step is like become kind of weird,
Yeah.
so I use the old guy term, which is on chip, but whatever. So you're on chip, and then that car has one job at that point. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to it doesn't need to be in fifth gear and give it a little bit of gas and overtake somebody on the highway to move over.
Yeah.
It doesn't. That's not its job.
Right.
So with those cars, the principles of keeping them alive are totally different than what I do. And if I was instructed to do those cars, I would look at those principles and work with them and figure out, essentially test, verify, and then adjust. But I don't do enough of those cars to.
Right.
Yeah, he does it. He checks in every once in a while.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Now, two-step. Two-stepping and anti-lag, right? Now, these are things that people, you see with these platforms, 2J, RB, all the JDM iconic platforms, people do two-stepping, and that's the one thing people want to see when you go to a car show with these cars. It's known that they do hurt the engine, right? Or they do end up hurting the valve train over time of continuously doing that. And possibly maybe even your oil pump gears, especially. So you seem to have this built into a lot of the cars. Car shows, you have cars that want a two-step. You have it set up that way. There's people that maybe don't have that kind of stuff set up because they don't want the customers blowing up their cars. So how do you work with that, or customers that say they want to have a two-step on their car and anti-lag as well?
It's a pretty simple formula. There's certain things that can go wrong. Just fix them. So the oil pump can go wrong. So no car leaves us without, at minimum, billet oil pump gears.
Okay.
So she wants you to throw the frisbee. Do not throw the frisbee. You will not do anything else in the next 2 hours if you throw that frisbee. So valve train wise, shimless. Okay. Right. Takes care of that. And then other than that, it's just a matter of making sure that the hardware can take it.
Okay.
I mean, two-step isn't that bad on the engine as people say. It's just the byproducts of stuff. For example, if you blow your oil pump while two-stepping, your motor's going to grenade because you have no oil pressure.
Right.
Right. The only thing that really suffers when you two-step, other than the hardware we just talked about, is going to be like your physical manifold.
Okay.
It's going to change temperature very quickly.
Right.
It's going to hurt it. Same thing goes for the turbo. The valves kind of get hurt.
Okay.
But you shouldn't be running valves in it that can't handle it, so to speak. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like I've never hurt an engine two-step. I've blown up oil pumps before we were doing what we do now, which is we put billet gears and or upgrade to a billet pump. And I mean, in that circumstance, we didn't hurt anything because the engine protection caught it and shut it off immediately. Okay. And we literally pulled it apart, found there was nothing wrong with it, put a pump in it. The car was running 3 days later. Yeah. So I personally have not experienced any engine damage that came only from two-step. Okay. And the science doesn't lead me to believe that there's anything you're really hurting other than stressing out your what's it called? Your exhaust valves and your turbine wheel, I guess. Yeah. I mean, definitely lost a few manifold gaskets to it.
You're running the metal ones, of course?
Yeah, you'll lose that.
Okay.
But then we don't, because now we run the Artec stainless manifolds and everything, and you can't warp those. It's not the gaskets that go out. It's the manifolds themselves. Like tubular manifolds like to warp.
Okay. And then so the Artec manifolds, you don't have any issues.
I can't get them to warp.
Do you think that the Artec manifolds don't? I have an Artec manifold too. Shout out to Ben. Now, the one thing that I've heard was that with that manifold, it doesn't really have that iconic sound, right? The sound is kind of not the same as running maybe like let's say a 6 boost or something like that. Have you noticed any of that difference in sound at all? No,
I have not. I don't. Okay.
I don't know why, but this is something that I've heard that it doesn't sound the same.
I don't know, man. I've never been able to hear that. I mean, I'm a musician, I music's a thing for me. It's one of the hobbies. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know.
You have nothing noticeable.
I have
nothing. Okay.
They all sound kind of killer.
Yeah.
You know,
I
it just depends on what. I mean, I haven't noticed it.
Okay.
You know, if anything, I think they sound better in some regards.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most of those sounds, a lot of it is your turbo. And also, people. Here's the thing too, and this is going to piss off a lot of people. Like people put way too much emphasis in blow-off valves.
I'm not running one, but
and they think that like does something for the most part. It doesn't. What they're hearing. Calm down, Nova. What they're hearing is they're actually hearing turbo flutter, and they think it's, you know.
So you don't run blow-off valves?
Oh, I do.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. But what I'm saying is I think a lot of people mistake turbo flutter for a blow-off valve sound. So what I'm saying is there's all these things that people don't really understand what's happening, yet they make an opinion on what something sounds like. So
Okay.
So for someone to tell me, oh, this manifold makes it sound different, it's like, based on what?
Yeah.
Oh, I saw these 3 videos on YouTube and someone was talking about it, so now I've made a choice in life.
Yeah.
Calm down, we're not playing frisbee. So, you know, it's, I don't know. I mean, I haven't noticed a difference in sound, but maybe there is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh.
So now, one of the most common things with RBs, right? Everybody says these motors are not reliable.
They're not.
Right? Now, they're not.
They're not.
Now, comparing it to, like, let's say like a 2J, of course, right? Now, everyone says these motors are not reliable. Even for me, they're saying, why are you going to put a less reliable engine in your car and so on, right? Now, there are a ton of things you have to do to make sure the car does run properly, and at least you can get more life, or so you can get more life out of it, right? Now, oil is the biggest thing.
Biggest one, yep.
Right? Now, it seems like the oil pump situation has been figured out,
Yeah.
right?
For sure.
It's pretty
Yeah.
much taken care of. Yeah. You said you run billet gears, and you also, do you run Nittos or you run PRPs?
I have run both. I love both. I mostly run PRPs.
Okay.
Because they look cool.
Okay, so just a look factor, but you're always going to run either one or the other, right? That's a standard in order for you to have that.
Yeah, we just kind of base it on RPM and like goals for the car. So if we're doing just kind of like our basic like 600 horsepower build, which is like our go-to because it just makes everybody happy.
Yeah.
Then an N1 pump with gears, totally fine. If we're gonna shoot for 800 plus with VCAM and all these, you know, all these things, at that point, N1 pump will do it. Excuse me, but I prefer to do a Nitto or a PRP at that point.
Okay.
PRP just because, you know, Team Herman, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, one of the things that like the video I saw when I first found out about you was when you were talking about sloshing, oil slosh, right? And that was when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in terms of a sump setup. Now, I'm not all-wheel drive. I'm rear sump, so it doesn't really, I guess I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it does. Now, most of the RBs are front sump, right? So now one of the things that you had mentioned and you were showing data and so on is you can't really tell if you're having these issues on dyno because the car isn't under motion, I guess. Inertia, right? So now, in between gear changes is when you had the data to prove that the oil pressure was dropping because the oil was not staying in the sump, right? So what are some of the things that you recommend if you're going to build an RB and you want to make some power, or even if you don't want to make power, that you should put on your car to kind of make sure you're not having these oil starvation issues?
Yeah, there's a checklist.
Okay.
So the first thing you want to do with RB is, if you can, right, is change the pump gear or change the pump.
Right.
Step one. That involves removing the oil pan. So if you put an extension on it, guess what? You can fill the thing to the factory fill mark. Now you're running 8.5, 9 quarts of oil.
Okay.
You saw the video. It
Right.
works. You're not going to have any problems. There's a couple little things you can do in there too. You can drill out there's these stupid little holes that let the oil flow from the back of the pan to the front of the pan.
Okay.
You can drill those out, make them a little bigger. It helps.
Yeah.
No one's going to want to hear this. Oil drains, like head drains, are a myth.
Head drains are a myth?
I mean, they help. They don't do anything, though. You're not going to do that and fix your oiling problem.
Oh, wow. Okay. This is like... It's like this is the
Let me
one
explain
thing that
oil
everybody... Okay.
Hey, the head drain thing is so frustrating. Where does your crankcase pressure come from?
Slipping past the rings.
Right.
Right.
Where does your engine breathe from? RB. Where does your RB? Most engines actually, but where does your RB specifically breathe from?
There's like breather valves on the top
On
of
the valve
the
cover, right?
Yeah.
Right.
On the cover,
So,
right.
So the pressure, right, has leaks out of the rings, right? Fills up the block, goes through the head, and then finally escapes out of the breather ports.
Right.
At the same time, what's oil trying to do? That's in the head.
Go back down to the sump.
Right. So you could put drains in it and they're going to help, but they're not going to fix anything. You've made it slightly better.
So you're saying that having that head drain
is not a fix. It maybe did a small change in how much oil might return back, but it is not going to, it's not what it's made out to be. It's good to have, right? And we don't do them, but I mean, I get it, you know?
Right.
But it really, all you're doing is adding a really, really, really annoying leak point.
Yeah, because it's in the back, right by the firewall.
Yep.
Now,
ask me how many motors I've pulled out to fix a head drain leak. I have the data before and after a head drain, and it made zero issue. It made zero change. There's two things. There's only one thing that's ever fixed the oil pressure issue, is just more capacity. And you can do this on a stock pan, by the way. I don't recommend it because what happens is you have to keep up with it, right? But you can take a factory pan and just overfill the crap out of it.
What about the
factory
crank though, and going through the oil? Doesn't it make it harder, more stress?
I don't have one here, do I? I'll send you a picture.
Okay.
Of where the factory dipstick is. Like if you would have the pan off and you put the dipstick in,
yeah,
dude, that the high mark is way below the baffling of the block. You
really?
can run a lot of oil through them. Yeah, you can overfill them by like 2 quarts. And then you're fine on a stock pan.
On a stock pan. Okay.
The reason I don't like to do that is because now it becomes the responsibility of the driver or the owner of the car / whoever's maintaining the car to always keep up with that. So I can't give you an 800 horsepower car that I know is going to have massive oil pressure issues.
Yeah.
If I gave you a 400 horsepower car, it's going to have oil pressure issues.
Right.
800 horsepower, you're really having oil pressure issues.
Yeah.
Right. And hope that whoever changes the oil next, if it's not me, understands this concept.
Right.
You know? And I've had it on the flip side too, actually. This is a funny story. We did like a little build for a dude like 3-4 years ago. Super happy with the car. Not one of those people that gets married to cars. So after like 8-9 months, he sold it. Sold it. Other dude's super happy with it. Everybody's like stoked on it. Everyone's happy with the deal. Everything's cool, no problem. I get a phone call from the original owner. Hey man, so and so's calling me. They're saying the car keeps going to limp mode. I'm like, okay, well let's figure it out. Bring it in. Bring the car in. Plug into it. Code. Low oil pressure. Check the dipstick. Wasn't even reading. It has a pan extension. Put oil in it. Not reading. Put oil in it. Not reading. Put oil in it. Not reading. Finally, it starts to read. Right. It took like 3 quarts of oil for it to finally start reading. Right. I call the new owner up. I'm like, hey man, did you recently do an oil change? Yeah. I'm like, how much oil you put in it? Oh, the manual said 5 quarts.
Oh, with an extension? That's crazy.
Right.
So he's like missing 4 quarts, 3 to 4 quarts?
3.5 to actually get it where it needs to be. But you see what I'm saying?
Damn.
So, so it's one of those things you can't expect the people to actually, mind you, all he had to do was look at the dipstick at that point. Right. So that was like a really thing. But if you give someone a visual, a dipstick, they can keep putting oil in it until it's full. So I feel good about it.
Okay.
Some of the behind you, that actually there's one that it just wasn't in the dude's budget to do the oil pan extension. So it is what it is. His dipstick's modified, so I actually have a little punch, and I actually punch a new high mark. So that way in the future, if somebody goes in there, they can set the oil up to that.
Right.
And then that right there, that conversation we had, is why RBs mostly blow up
because of oil.
Oil, yeah, including the pumps, by the way, too. That's actually something that I've come to terms with recently. Remember, we're always evolving.
Yeah.
I think the reason the pumps blow up is actually oil starvation.
Interesting.
Or the biggest factor in the stock pumps blowing up is oil starvation.
In the stock pumps, not like a aftermarket.
No. In the stock pumps, I think if you think about how a oil pump works, right? It's a pump.
Right.
How does the pump lubricate itself?
That pump specifically?
Yeah.
With oil.
Via the oil that it's pumping.
Yeah, right.
So now if it's cavitating and there's air going through it, back to friction.
Back to friction, heat, yeah.
And that's when now if you put a billet gear in it, obviously the billet gear is stronger.
But still, I mean, it's
still, yeah. I mean, well, now you've kind of taken it out of the equation that the pump's going to break, but you're still not feeding the engine with oil,
right?
And so you're not winning either way. But I base this off just taking apart hundreds of these stupid things over the years, and just seeing the humongous differences in characteristics of cars, through just different examples. Like, I import cars. I've brought in over 300 cars. Our business right now is we just do in-house builds, take care of that thing, and the rest of it is literally shop support.
Right.
So we tune for their shops, we give recipes to their shops, and we also take care of a lot of the importers. I mostly bring in stock cars. I prefer to bring in stock cars.
Okay.
But we work with a lot of dudes that don't do that. We work with dudes that bring in Apexi build cars and like Greddy build cars and HCAS technical factory build cars and all this stuff. And, if you're buying a $250,000 one of these things, typically you want to put a little bit of insurance on it.
Right.
So they contract us to go through it, make sure it's good. And then typically it's an easy sell to be like, hey, let's, no offense to it, but let's get rid of this FCON, or whatever, or Power FC or whatever's in it. Let's put a modern ECU in, let's put an oil pressure sensor, fuel pressure sensor. Let's just at least make sure that when you sell this car to somebody, they're not going to call you the next day and they blow up,
Right.
And through that over the years, I've had to take things apart and I've just acquired all this like visual information and you can see it every time.
Yeah.
Where the cars that obviously had this lifestyle, the pump looks like this. The cars that had obviously this lifestyle, the pump looks like that. There's plenty of cars in 32 GTRs with like short nose cranks and stuff in Japan right now with 200,000 miles on them on the factory oil pump. Why hasn't it broken? Because the dude's just cruising on the street with it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's true.
Yeah.
I would assume that. Yeah.
But if you take a brand new one and you go on the track a million times, like I said, you've seen the stock video, even the stock car has oil pressure issues. Yeah. So you have to, I attribute it to that,
So basically overfill if you can to make sure that.
It's cheap insurance.
Yeah.
The most important part of it is just to have a reaction, to have a reactionary thing happen, usually in the ECU, where some sort of engine protection.
Yeah.
That's step one. If you have that, at least the problem's happening.
Right.
And then you overfill / pan extension / better oil pump / whatever to then remedy that.
Okay. Now, have you ever tried doing like a clear hose out of the head drain to see if anything's coming out of there?
I have not.
Okay.
But
I'm curious.
But I have put one in and tested a car. And had no difference in.
I was just curious to see how much, because
mind you, it doesn't hurt.
Yeah,
it doesn't hurt. And actually, technically, with our setups, we actually would benefit from one, and I'll explain that in a second. Because we do what's called a closed loop catch can.
Oh, you were showing me that at the show. Yeah.
So we actually, funny enough, this car just came from Japan.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it has a closed loop catch can. Who would have thought? This is built by some shop in Japan. Gee.
Explain a closed loop catch can.
It's a factory PCV system.
Okay.
It just breathes back into itself. So a closed loop catch can works like this. You have your gases coming out of the engine. They go into the catch can.
Right.
They settle. The breather, instead of it being a filter that fills your whole engine bay with a nice hue of oil and makes it disgusting, right? Instead of that filter, what it does is it actually goes back into the inlet tube of the turbo. So when the turbo spools up, that resistance of the inlet filter, right, because there's always going to be some resistance, actually pulls a vacuum out of your crankcase.
So you don't get any oil in the lines in the.
It's minimum.
Okay.
It's almost irrelevant.
Okay.
And then we go one step further and make it fully closed loop by actually adding a drain to our catch can, so our oil actually goes back into our pan where it belongs. And that's another thing actually from back in the day that people would mess up all the time. If you would have an issue with your engine, right? Like you spun a bearing or something.
Yeah.
And then you go and you're like, oh, there's a half a quart of oil in my catch can. This must be the byproduct of the engine blowing up. No. You let a quart of oil collect in your catch can. If it's in your catch can, guess where it's not?
In the sump.
In the sump, and you starve the thing of oil. You're looking at that wrong. It's all base. There's so many theories out there. People have like these stupid theories too of like what torque crushes bearings and all this other stuff.
Yeah. That was actually going to be one of my questions as well.
It's temperature.
Okay.
Keep it lubricated. keep it happy. It's going to live. After that, it's all hardware stress. Now we're going into Jay's territory where they're physically stressing hardware to failure.
Right.
You know, we don't. You know, the hardware, our 800 horsepower engine, hardware-wise, is good for 1,300 horsepower, technically speaking.
Right.
Our 600 horsepower package is good for 900 horsepower, technically speaking. Right. So we don't stress hardware. So
Yeah.
if you just keep the hardware happy, it, in theory, right, it lasts basically forever. I mean, obviously everything has a life or a life expectancy, but it's not, hey, we need to rebuild this engine every other day. You know, we just did a compression test. We have an R32 GTR in Miami. The owner of that car beats the crap out of it. Like text messages every once in a while, like, hey, I just beat this, and hey, I just beat that, you know, and like a twin turbo, whatever, rolled up to me on the highway and check it out. You know, it's a quick car. And it doesn't have an easy life. And that's a 5-year-old build at this point. And we came in, you know, it's probably has over 15,000 miles on it of abuse. Perfect compression, no issues, you know, but oil pan extension, plenty of safety features. I've gotten the phone call many a times with it. Hey, you know, engine protection came on, something happened. It's always been silly things, fuel filter.
Okay.
You know, it's an R32 GTR, so it has an old fuel tank. You know, once you put E85 through it, it's going to clean itself out. You're going to, you know, stuff like that.
Okay.
But if we didn't have those systems in place, what would happen to that engine?
It would have cost a lot of money.
Goes lean, has a problem, blah, blah, blah. You know, so if the hardware can take it, you keep the temperatures in the right spot, and you just allow everything to work within a certain threshold, that you're fine. And then you just set yourself up with an ECU that lets you control those thresholds. If anything goes out of that box, stop it.
Right.
You know, like I tell people, you know, whenever, you know, because my customers are spoiled brats at this point because they don't have these big issues. So they're like, Roberto, hey, it's got a leak. Okay, cool. Yeah, I really wish this thing wasn't leaking. I'm like, dude, it's like the 4 years we've been beating the shit out of this thing. It has a leak. That's fine. You know what I mean? It's okay. You know, anywhere else you'd be calling me going like, hey, I'm on the side of the road and there's a hole in it. You know what I mean? So I tell people like a check engine light is a lot better, you know, than a hole in the block on the side of the road. You know, like our biggest issue is a leak here and there. Right. You know, which is just part of the game, right?
So now, is it bad to run too many oil coolers in your setup?
Technically speaking, yeah.
It is bad?
I mean, it's a threshold, man. That box, oil can be too cold, oil can be too hot.
Okay.
So if you need a cooler, if you're constantly leaving that threshold because of higher temps, you need more cooler. If your oil is having a hard time getting to temp, you need less cooler. It's very simple. Our street cars usually get away with just a basic 15 to like 20 row cooler. Nothing crazy.
Just one.
And we typically, I rarely see more than like a 15, 20 degree deviation from coolant temp. AC on, on the Palmetto, in stop traffic, coolant temp's 190, oil temp might be 210, whatever, something like that. When you start moving, it goes down into the 190s. That's fine.
Okay.
For dedicated track cars, then we start adding fans.
Okay.
And we let the computer do the work. Right. But every single one of our cars does have an oil temp sensor. And we do add that as one of the axes to oil pressure protection. Right. So what happens is the colder the oil is, right, the more it can, this is technically wrong, but I'm going to say this in a simple term, the more it can lubricate. Right. Because what's lubrication? Right. Keeping things from touching. Yeah. Right. As the oil thins out, obviously it doesn't have the ability so what you do is you, in the axis of engine protection, you actually want a higher oil pressure threshold with hotter oil because it needs to have more pressure to do the same job of lubricating.
Wouldn't the pressure be higher if it's colder? Correct,
but you need more pressure if it's hotter. These are the safety thresholds. Right. Okay. So lower temperature oil at 40 psi is going to be doing a better job lubricating than higher temperature oil at 40 psi. So if I have like a low pressure warning at 40 psi on running temp, I would have 50 if my oil went through the oil temperature threshold went too high up, because that's how I do it. Okay. As things leave the realm of happy, we need to become stricter.
Okay.
more engine protection as it needs, as things get out of that realm, and that's how you keep these things alive. So it's another thing that if you just look at it, you can do something about it.
Yeah.
But there's a bunch of people out there who actually have I have guys that tell me that I like rip people off because I sell them all these sensors.
Really?
Dude, I make $6 selling you an old temp sensor. I'm not ripping you off. If I'm putting my fucking name on it, I'm gonna have this thing last forever. I'm not,
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, there's shops out there that won't put oil pressure sensors in these cars.
That's
and they'll put
crazy.
computers that like have the capability of accepting one and doing something with it, but they won't even put this up,
Right.
I had a guy once who wanted me to tune his car and I wouldn't do it because he didn't have an oil pressure sensor. And he sent me a screenshot of the shop that built it. He had emailed them like, hey, why doesn't my car have an oil pressure sensor? And the shop sent him an email, screenshot of an email saying, oh, well, it wasn't in your budget. We recommend you just keep an eye on the stock gauge.
What?
The stock gauges don't work for shit. They're too slow. They don't even catch those oil pressure drops.
Right.
Also, if you're flooring it in a car, you're not staring at the oil pressure gauge,
Yeah.
especially not the stock one.
Right.
So
Now, one of the things that you keep mentioning about, making sure that the car is in check is the ECU, right? Now, you run Haltech and you run Motec. Now, most RBs that we all see are mostly on Haltech, right? Now, you mentioned before it has to do with engine protection, right? Which is the biggest thing. And then comparing the two, you mentioned that Haltech has better engine protection than Motec.
So okay, let's start this way.
Okay.
Ask me what ECU is in my personal cars.
What ECU is in your personal cars?
Motec.
Okay.
Okay, so let's start with that. Motec is superior. It just is. I'm sorry.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I'm a dealer for both. I love both. Both companies treat me awesome.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind with Motec M1 is. Hold on. I actually have examples because
nice.
I'm a visual guy.
Is that a R3? Yes, it is.
Yeah. At this point, don't run elites anymore. This is
Yeah. Right.
S and R is where you want to be. So this guy came out 2 years ago.
I think 2 years ago now.
2 years ago?
Yeah, probably 2 years. Maybe. Probably.
Something to keep in mind, this guy came out almost 15 years ago.
15 years ago.
I think, something like that. Maybe 12, something like that. I don't know. Go fact check me. But this is a 10-plus-year-old computer.
Yeah.
He's a hardware. So you have to cut it some slack.
Okay.
This is now kind of catching up with this. So what makes them, oh, thank you, dog. What makes them different is this is going to be a locked firmware.
Okay.
So what happens is Haltech writes the firmware. The firmware comes with the ECU. You have access to it. But the firmware has options for a million things. Like, I can take this and fire up that GT. I can take this, fire up this RB. I can take this and fire up the Scion you drove up in.
Yeah.
It doesn't care.
Yeah.
All that information's in it.
Right.
This guy, no, not at all. This guy has to be. This guy can do anything, or it can only do one thing.
Okay.
You get to pick and choose because this one allows you to build your own firmware.
Okay.
So
It's more for developers, it seems like.
it's right. It's a development. So this one always has the ability to have better engine protection, but stock for stock. So we're just comparing the factory. I shouldn't say factory. GP basic Motec firmware.
Yeah.
This engine protection is a little better. Now, if you compare this to what was available at the time of this conception from Haltech, which was like this platinum stuff, it blows it out of the water.
Right.
But remember, old hardware, brand new hardware, and it's now
Catching up.
/ tipping over a little bit.
Right.
So it's so I don't want to use the term that the what's it called, that the Haltech is better.
Okay.
But in terms of engine protection, that gives you a lot more flexibility.
Okay.
Versus this in the packages that I have available. That doesn't mean that I can't have somebody sit there and write some elaborate thing that makes it even better.
Right.
I don't need anyone to, because what this provides is still plenty.
Okay. So now when it comes to a lot of safeties, I noticed that a lot of let's say drag racers, right? They don't really turn a lot of the safeties on. Now, in that situation, it may be crucial to hurting the engine, I'm sure, if you're running down the track. Can you kind of elaborate on?
Is it worth it to you? Does the engine owe you anything? That's what matters, right?
Okay.
If you're Thursday night test and tune and you're trying to see if the new shock setup is better that you installed on Monday, Tuesday,
Yeah.
have your engine safeties on. Why are you going to lose your engine
Yeah.
on a Thursday? Because you're trying to see if your new shocks are better.
Yeah.
If you're at World Cup and it's the difference is you and the guy next to you for the first place and the bragging rights, and you know, I'd love to say the $5,000 check or whatever, but that's peanuts to those guys.
Yeah.
That check could literally say, like, that could not be a check. That could literally just be a big sign that says "F you all, I won today," you know, and people would still line up for it because that's really all that matters. It's just, did you win or not?
Right.
You know? But anyway, then shut that shit off, because guess what? If you lose half that engine, but still win, what did that engine owe you?
Yeah. That's true.
That's how it works. That's how I do
Yeah.
it. If it's a button. So GT, all engine protections in the world, it's on a button. So when we're just testing, everything's on. When we go do the 330 run and everything jives and we feel comfortable about it, Johnny, hit the button, shut all that off. It's still going to tell me if there's problems. It just won't do anything about it.
It just won't do anything about it. Right.
Right. Which is kind of a nice thing with like the Haltech. It has a really good, almost like OEM vibe to the protections. Okay. So like it can do something, it could not do something, but it splits it up into different levels of it. It's not just one rule.
Right.
So like the Motec has the ability to do the same thing. It just isn't as sophisticated, I guess I should say.
Right.
But again, it's also writable. So you could kind of, you know.
Now, what if let's say if you have an injector failure or something like that, will the Haltech be able to kind of shut things down?
EGT.
So you have to have EGTs in order for that to work in terms of injectors. Interesting.
Technically speaking, this is getting nerdy, you can technically have a situation where the ECU, if you have the correct trigger pattern and the correct hardware, the ECU can actually do a cylinder contribution test at all times, where it knows what cylinder is helping, and it can tell if it's down a cylinder and then do something about it. Okay. But I mean, but
then there's still that doesn't necessarily mean it's technically an injector, right?
Right. It's a good theory. I mean, like diesel, like I don't know if like automotive does this. By trade, I'm a diesel and heavy equipment mechanic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So like diesel engines do that. So like they actually can sit there and when you do a compression test on a modern diesel engine, you don't actually put a compression test to it. You actually just do a contribution test, and it tells you if the cylinder.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because it has there's that much resolution in the position of it. So it knows every single time that there's a flash event in the cylinder, right? It should produce X amount of whatever it's looking for.
Right.
So, you know, if one cylinder consistently falls short, it knows, okay, this one's not contributing as much. There's something wrong. You know, and that's your compression test.
Interesting. Interesting. I didn't know that. Well, that's good to know that you should have EGTs if you want to.
Because it tells you the full story.
Yeah.
Because again, what's going back to that T word, it's just temperature.
Temperature. Right.
The temperature coming out of that exhaust tells you all you need to know. It just isn't needed.
Right.
It's just data.
Yeah.
It's not actually, you know, what's the word here? It's just a threshold and eyes into how everything else is working. That's it.
But it's probably good. See, you're just kind of making me lean more towards having EGTs just because. But
then again, it also depends on the tuner too. If the tuner doesn't, like cool, my EGTs show up on the screen. Okay, is it doing anything about it? And when is it doing something about it? You know, so
that's true. Depends on the tuner, right?
Yeah, you know, and with EGT, you basically just have stages of it,
right?
Because there's too hot, but we're okay. There's too hot and we could get hurt, or there's going to be a hole in the cylinder in about 2 seconds. We should probably cut this thing off.
Damn.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my Dyno was rented when I first got it. And it was a big horsepower Supra, like 1600 horsepower. It was being remote tuned. And it was the Dyno rental. And the gentleman who owned the car didn't have time to hook up the EGTs. Or there was some miscommunication.
Yeah.
I think the car was like on Pro EFI, and he had like a Haltech EGT module, but like I guess the tuner thought the Supra was on Motec. And Motec, you can actually plug in a Haltech one because you can with these you can actually program the can to read basically anything. You can do the same thing with Pro 5, but it just wasn't done. So they decided that they were just going to ignore EGTs. Please don't break anything. Okay, thank you, dog. They decided that they were going to just send it, and that's how. After that night, there was oil in every single crevice of my shop.
What?
Because they had 2 stages of injection. They didn't realize that number 5 stage 2 wasn't coming on. Burned a hole right in cylinder 5. And his, again, kind of a rush together car, apparently. One of the catch can lines wasn't hooked up properly, so it was just kind of shooting straight forward. So when it blew, what it did was it just shot oil all to the front of the dyno, which is, you've never been in the old shop, but the front faced shelving. So everything on the shelf got covered in oil. Yeah. And the whole shop was a cloud of smoke because the other catch can line was facing towards the turbo.
God damn!
So it was just a big giant mess.
Catastrophic failure there.
Over a $46 injector. You know, that's another thing too. Like it's kind of funny. People have those failures, and they never bother to like figure out what it is. Like, dude, I've seen it happen. I've seen dudes, specifically on a 2J, blow an engine up the same way 3 times and never ask why. Always blame something different. Tuner's fault, engine builder's fault, whatever's fault. It's never what caused this.
Yeah.
And it's always been whether it's a coil pack acting up, an injector acting up. You know, there's a reason why these things break.
Yeah.
You know, the sensors give you that information, but if you don't do anything with it, you know, like we don't. You know, again, that $15,000 injector machine, we have that because no car comes here for maintenance without getting the injectors tested. It's just part of the process.
Yeah.
You know, I don't care if the injectors are 6 months old, 3 weeks old, whatever. If we're taking anything apart for any reason, it takes me half an hour to put it on the machine and just make sure they feel right.
just why not? Might as well.
You know,
makes sense. Yeah.
Or when I have a car on the dyno that I'm not too sure about. I just take the injectors off, check them.
It's a quick safety just to make sure
it's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
Now, one of the things that I was speaking to somebody about, he had GTR, met him at TX2K. He was telling me he's on a Motec, and he was saying that Motec has by far the best traction control setup on any ECU, right? Now, how does Haltech compare in terms of traction control? Like, how does that work? Do you know how that works and how it cuts timing or power? I don't know how that works really when it comes to traction.
Depends. So it depends on how you want to look at it. So I mostly play with these 4-wheel drive cars that don't really require much traction control. So it's not something that I play with too much. I'm actually getting a lot more into it now. So simplistic traction control is essentially timing and kind of a boost reduction. Issue with reducing boosts is it's a very low resolution thing. By the time you reduced enough boost to gain traction and then reintroduce the boost, a lot of time went by. So you're not really doing yourself any favors, at least not quickly, you know? Timing's nice because timing's a very quick thing. You can reduce torque very, very quickly by pulling timing. But what's the byproduct of
that? Heat.
Yeah, temperature. So temperature. Now you're essentially 2-stepping as a traction control. So the best way to do it is drive-by-wire. Essentially letting the ECU pedal for you. The Haltech system works. The Motec system is just better resolution, better. It just works better, everything. But you're also going to find that with Motec, the hardware's better. Even though it's old, it just works better. We've had kind of like a big, ever since I converted my cars to Motec, like all my customers have kind of been following. And the reason is because I hand everybody the keys, they drive the car and they go, "What's different?" I'm like, "Oh, it's Motec." He's like, "Yeah, but what's different?" I'm like, "Nothing. It's just a different computer. Like, why does the car feel this way?" I'm like, "I don't know, dude. It just feels better, right?" You know? "Oh, I thought it was in my head. You felt it too." "Yeah, this car feels better." Hand the key to the next guy. "Dude, what's with this car? It's just, what's the difference? It's just Motec." What do you mean? And we've consistently done this. We've put in Motecs in cars. A lot of them we've removed something and put them in, and everybody has the exact same reaction afterwards, which is like, this just feels better. I know what it is. It's a resolution thing. But it's just it's just better.
Yeah. Let's say to go from a Haltech to a Motec, how much more are you spending?
I've done the math. It just depends on the approach.
Okay.
It's like a 30% increase in cost.
Okay. So now, is the cost more so on the hardware or is it in the firmware?
It's basically firmware. Hardware is like a 10% difference in cost.
Okay.
I don't want to call it an issue, but the difference between Haltech, Motec is Haltech sells you everything unlocked, ready to go, firmware included, features included, full logging, everything. There you go.
Okay.
Which is why, to this day, in my opinion, Haltech is the best bang for the buck for anybody.
Okay.
You know, Motec doesn't do that. So Motec, you have to buy the hardware, right? Little guy.
Mm-hmm.
So this guy's useless, completely useless. You also can't buy it from anybody unless they're a dealer.
Okay.
So it's very hard. It's not as easy as just going on eBay or Amazon and just buying a computer. This
Right.
you have to buy from me. You have to buy from your Real Street or whoever is an actual dealer, and then we have to then provide you firmware for it.
Okay.
Right? Like we can't sell you this without firmware. So you need to know what you're getting yourself into.
Got you.
And that's where it gets wacky because I think the cheapest firmware is like, it's called like GP. I don't know. Don't quote me. It's $1,000. We'll call it $1,000. You can go all the way to some crazy firmwares that are $2,500, $3,000. So you might be paying more for the firmware than the ECU. But like I mentioned earlier, these are designed for developers. The reason that firmware costs that much money is because of the amount of time and R&D it has in it.
Got you.
Right? So, that Haltech will never plug into an R35 and make everything work. It just won't.
Interesting.
This will, and it's been doing it for 10 years.
So there's tons of different firmware you can use for different cars.
Mm-hmm. Like for example, like this is a GPR, which is their kind of basic setup. Like this ECU is actually out of my Z. It's actually getting upgraded to a different firmware because I'm not using that anymore. I'm using another one, but this will power anything, do anything, and give you basically all the basic features. This is basically an Elite 2500.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
I could update the firmware on this thing, and now it's an R3, but I didn't change hardware.
Got you.
That makes sense?
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
Right.
Okay.
And then if I wanted to get really ballsy with it, which is kind of what I'm doing now, is get a development license, which this has, and now you write your own. Which is a little above my pay grade. So I have a license. I don't actually do the physical code writing because I already have too many things on my plate to learn to do. So I have Motec USA. They write stuff for me based on one of their setups, and like, you felt the white 33, the throttle response on that.
Yeah.
That's a custom built like 4 turbo ITB firmware, and you felt it.
Yeah.
And you're gonna drive it, and you're gonna be like, what is this? Because it's just so crispy, But again, someone put hundreds of hours into developing this firmware,
right,
specifically for boosted trumpet car, boosted ITB. And you felt it. Now when you drive it,
response was crazy. Yeah.
So that's the Motec difference. Is there is off the shelf options. There's also not off the shelf custom options, and there's just so many ways to slice it. On top of the hardware itself is still pretty much ahead of everybody. At least everybody that I deal with. Right. I've been told like M-Tron and other stuff are on par. I just I have no reason to go down that path because I just don't.
When you say firmware though, for people who don't understand how that works, the firmware itself, is that like maps, tables? Like what is that technically considered?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean it's more than that, but yeah.
Okay.
I guess. Let's see here. Well, think of it like when you have like your cell phone.
Okay.
Right? So like the firmware of the cell phone is what possible, how do I describe it? I don't get made fun of by people that like know what they're talking about. And then I also make sense to people that don't know. The firmware essentially is what dictates the capabilities of the hardware.
Right. Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
The software is what you interface with.
Okay. Right.
What that software has available to it to manipulate and adjust and stuff is the firmware. So your phone's firmware allows you to call people.
Right.
The hardware has the ability to call people.
Right.
The software is what lets you hit the buttons and everything makes sense, and then you make the phone call.
That's the interface, right? Okay.
Yeah.
That
So if
makes
that
sense.
makes sense, I'm sure I'm going to get shit for saying
No,
that,
it makes
but
a lot of
that's
sense.
the easiest way I can explain it.
That's
Yeah.
the best way to kind of explain it.
So, for example, this doesn't have 4-wheel drive control.
Oh, it doesn't.
There's nothing in this specific one. My firmware, or Motec USA's firmware, has it.
Okay.
So same computer, same everything, and I can literally take this right now, right, and load in GPR, no 4-wheel drive, take it, load in, it's called USA Sports Car. Magically, this thing has 4-wheel drive now. Firmware. This is just a piece of hardware that just says that knows how to say yes and no.
Okay.
What those yeses and nos translates into is the firmware.
Got you. Okay. All right, cool. So we got a little bit of that Haltech, Motec situation because I kind of wanted to figure that out in terms of like what's better, what's more cost effective, what their uses are, and so on, right?
Yeah, 90% of people, Haltech, I would recommend because it's easy to work with. You can basically give it to any tuner. My current standards of cars, how I want them to behave and perform, this is what I recommend. If it's not in the budget, we'll do Haltech. It's okay. It's not the end of the world.
Right.
But if you want what I consider to be the cream of the crop right now for my builds,
Motec. Okay. Well, there you have it. Motec it is. Motec it is. Now, with all these variables and factors that we've spoken about, right, during this podcast, right? You've driven a ton of cars, I'm assuming, mostly these. What to you is the best Skyline ever built? From factory.
From factory?
Yeah, that you've driven.
R32 GTR.
32? So you would take a 32 over 34?
Yeah, I'm actually buying a 32 GTR to leave in Japan so I can like drive it around like the different tracks and stuff. Scuba and Fuji and all that.
So why would you take a 32 over a 34?
All right, let's piss off the internet. 32 is a better car. I'm sorry. It's lighter. It's more nimble. It's easier to get in. It's more comfortable to drive aggressively. It's just a better car for driving. You know, these are cool as hell. I love them. I've owned them. You know, you're gonna take a spin in one. You know, it's not the same thing. 32 is just, you get behind a 32 and there's a little bit more confidence inspire. It is more confidence inspiring because it's like a tighter car. You feel more secure in it, you know, even though it's not, technically speaking. I'm pretty sure the crash rating on a 32 is worse than these. But, you know, 89 versus 99.
Yeah.
You know, 10-year difference, but in standards. But yeah, I think the 32 just hands down knocks them all out of the park. Now, 32 is not my favorite. 33 is my favorite.
Okay.
But the 32 is the superior car, in my opinion.
A 33 is your favorite because of the look, or?
Yeah, the goofy cars. I think my first two loves in cars were the Nissan 300ZX, Z32, and the S14.
S14, yeah.
S14. So when you look at a 33, what does it look like? It looks like this funky little bloopy S14-y thing. You know what I mean? And it just kind of has that vibe. So I've always gravitated to that one as my favorite, looks wise.
Yeah.
And it's what I own, obviously, but well, I own them all, but I will sell the 34 and the 32 way before I sell a 33.
So to drive 32, look wise 33.
33.
So it seems like 34 is at the bottom of your list now, technically.
But I respect it because without this car, we wouldn't be here right now.
Right.
Because without this car and without Fast and the Furious 2, we wouldn't be here right now. No one gave a shit about Big Bird in Fast and Furious 1. The yellow R33.
Right.
People didn't even know what the hell it was. 14-year-old me, however old I was, had no clue what that was. Could care less.
I think the Supra was the
Supra and that stupid Volkswagen were the only thing. That's cool, you know, because you knew what it was. You know.
Wait, hold on. You can't forget about the S2000 too. The S2000 was.
I guess it just wasn't on my radar.
Johnny's S2000.
Yeah, it wasn't on my radar.
That was on my radar. That's why I got one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, that's like an iconic scene.
Yeah, that's fair.
You know, he beat the Volkswagen.
Maybe it was a Supra. I think the Supra was the one that really.
Supra, of course, 100%. The Supra was the biggest one with that, and also the Veilside. Actually, it wasn't a Veilside. The RX-7 that Vin Diesel had first got away, and that was like the first time I actually started looking into those too. I was young. I was like 99, I think it was. So I was. I mean,
I was a complete kid. Those are just like the standouts. Maybe it's just because the liveries were the coolest or something. I don't know, but Fast and the Furious 2 came out, and that scene, you know, of the silver with the blue stripe going down the bridge and purging nitrous and all that. That's the reason we're here right now, whether people believe it or not. You know, that's why the Japanese car scene is what it is in the United States.
Is because of the Fast and Furious too.
100%. We if it wasn't for that, we might. Well, I guess it's a bad example because there's a Ford right there, but we would be here surrounded with Mustangs or something talking about it. You know,
No, it's true.
You know, I'm not saying that the car bug wasn't born in us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think those movies made it so that we look at these things differently. So you have to give it its respect.
Right. No, 100%. That's fair. That's a fair answer. I like the 34s, but I've never driven. I've driven actually a 34, but I can't really compare it to anything to even know what the difference is and how you would feel driving one or the
If
other.
only you were somewhere where we have them all.
Yeah.
So you can drive them all today. I have them all.
And all the GTRs have.
I actually have a stock 33 too. If you want to drive a stock, but I have a
Oh,
bonus.
I'm
stock
lying. I did drive a 33 at GTR Festival.
Okay.
It was a white one. But again, you kind of have to drive them back to back. Sort of like I think Donut Media did something like that, where they were driving different cars. And all the years of the Skyline, they do like that thing where they do all the years of Supra. So that's probably the best way to kind of do it, so you can kind of get a real feel for it. But all the GTRs, they have 4-wheel steering
Correct.
from factory.
Hikes, yeah.
And
Super
is that something that you turn off when you're building faster street cars?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
sketchy?
the sensation of it working is
Okay.
The sensation of it failing will kill you. So yeah, we take that off as soon as possible. A lot of people, you know, like swear by it, but like the people that do this are not are not asking the cars to do what we ask them to do.
Right.
So
I always wondered that because that's like
it's very sketchy.
super sketchy.
Super sketchy. And, you know, and a lot of cars had it. 240s had it. 300ZXs had it. You know, there's a lot of cars with it. And
Yeah.
It's you know, everybody takes it off because when it works, it's like, okay, well, like I guess I feel why that's there. Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool on the highway, crab walking and stuff like that. Like, okay, I get it. But then, dude, when you have 600-700 horsepower and you floor it and the car feels like it literally does this.
Nah.
And you
I'm
need,
good.
And you need to be a driver at that point because it's not like it's like a Supra or something.
Yeah.
Where you're counter steering.
Yeah.
No, you're hooked. You're just literally hooked sideways. It's not a fun sensation. And everybody does the same. Not everybody, but like most people that are novices do the same thing as they let off the throttle.
Oh shit.
And then, you know, things get real weird when you let off the throttle. You have to stay in it, you know. And but you'll literally move half a lane over when it happens.
God damn.
Yeah, so it's not fun.
So you have to. So to prevent the wheels from pivoting, do you have to have some type of like
lock bar? Yeah, there's different
okay.
ways of doing it. There's like a simplistic way where you literally lock it, and then there's more complicated ways where you literally remove the rack and just put in an actual, you know, adjustable control arm, and that's it. You're done.
Wow.
Nothing special about it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's sketchy. I always wondered that with
And
the
then
RVs.
take the bulb out in the dash so you
Yeah.
don't see it.
So I did forget to ask you one question about tuning. You did mention to me that if you're not running enough timing, that can cause more heat. Now, how I would think of it would be the opposite, right? Because if you're running less timing, you technically would have more fuel. And if you run more timing, you'd be burning off more fuel.
Yeah. So think about like two-step. What is it? What is two-step? Two-step is a rev limiter,
Okay.
right? With timing removed, right? So what you're doing is, and it's there's different versions of it. The pops and bangs, right, are a byproduct of you cutting ignition, not fuel.
Ah, okay.
So it'll cut the pulse of the plug, but it won't cut the pulse of the injector. So you're still running raw fuel through the engine.
Okay.
But because the timing is so low, you're increasing your EGTs. Increased EGTs causes the turbo to spool more. Because there's raw fuel in there, you see
Flames and stuff.
and people also assume that it's adding fuel.
Yeah.
You don't. If you add too much fuel, it cools the exhaust down too much. You get no flame out the back. You actually have to take away fuel in some. If you really want that aggressive, like car show two-step,
Flame, yeah.
it's not the most optimal thing. And that's also another thing. I know we talked about like dangers of two-step. If you're using two-step for the practicality of it only, which is to spool the turbo,
Yeah.
you basically do little to no damage because you are adding not correct, but you're adding more fuel to cool it down. So you still get the spool,
Yeah.
right? You're still going to get the spool and the torque and everything that comes with it,
Right.
But you don't get the fireworks,
I got
which is created by temperature. So, it's one of those things where it depends on how you do it. If you do it for show, you cause more damage because you're increasing temperatures. But like I said, what you're doing is you're actually pulling fuel, because the fuel doesn't just cool down your cylinder walls.
Right.
When it's raw, it cools down the manifold. Yeah.
So I was thinking when I said like less fuel, more fuel, I meant to say more efficient, because now now you're not burning off the fuel if it's less timing. Technically, that's how I would think about it.
Well,
It's kind of like one of those weird things where it's like you try to think about how it works, and then like how it could be more or less efficient with the way a motor works, and how it how the air comes into fuel and all that stuff too. So,
well, you have to remember what timing is doing. What you're doing is you're trying to ignite the fuel,
right,
as close to past top dead center as possible.
Right.
The higher in the stroke that you get the flash, the more leverage the piston then is able to put on the crankshaft through the rod. Right. The obviously, if you go too far, then you get a knock. Right. So you get and remember, knock and detonation are two different things.
Okay.
So you can physically put so much timing through an engine that you physically are causing the spark event to happen at or before top dead center.
Right.
That's a knock. Detonation is when the fuel pre-ignites without your control. So you could be dictating it to ignite way past top dead center.
Right.
But there's some condition in that cylinder that's causing it to ignite beforehand.
Got you.
Because remember, piston comes up, compresses right at top dead center.
Right.
Right.
Pushes it down.
So if you have an event where the piston's coming up and then
it ignites while it's going up,
that's your knock. Right.
And that's probably what can cause something to crush bearings.
That'll crush a bearing. Right.
Yeah.
The top
because
bearing.
of the pressure.
Correct.
Okay. Wow.
Correct. But you have to be careful though, because heat plays a big role in that. So that 5-6 degrees of timing that you're not putting in it, trying to keep yourself happy, might be the thing that screws you over. Because now your cylinder temps are higher. So now, remember those edges we spoke about?
Yeah.
They're glowing. Look at it like if you I'm trying to think here. If you ever did Nitro RC cars or something like that, they have glow plugs.
Right.
The glow plug, there's no spark plug there. What it is when you fire it up, that glow plug, that element is designed to stay glowing just based on the heat of the...
Isn't that how diesel works too?
No. Diesel uses glow plugs to fire it, to get it to help it to fire because there's not enough temperature.
Glow plugs. I'm like, isn't that the same thing?
No.
Okay.
Diesels fire the fuel. It's compression's what ignites it.
Yeah.
And then the fuel atomization is what dictates how efficient it is.
Right.
Yeah. So on a diesel engine, how well the fuel gets atomized by the injector dictates how efficient it is. Because remember, there's no spark event. It also dictates the timing, because it sprays it according to the position of the piston, assuming that it's going to ignite at whatever point or flash, and that's what causes a diesel engine to function.
Okay.
Yeah, no spark plug.
Now, how many dyno passes are too much? Because I've seen people do tons and tons of pulls on a dyno, right? Now, there's no magic number for this. But there has to be a point where it's like enough is enough, right? Now, how does that work when it comes to tuning a car?
It's tough. Realistically speaking, I'll give you an example. My cars, right? I could do 100 pulls, not going to change anything.
Yeah.
I know where that question comes from. The question comes from hurt engines on dyno.
Okay.
And this is I'm gonna say something. Everyone's gonna get mad and come at me with facts and prove me wrong, and I'll listen to you. Open loop tuning is garbage.
Open loop tuning is garbage.
Is garbage. Stop doing it. You're not God. You don't have the ability to control every single factor once that car leaves your shop or your dyno. You just don't.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Closed loop tuning keeps everything in that little threshold I told you about, even if things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And I'll give you an example. Let's start with a simple. This isn't really closed loop, I guess, but it's the basis of it. Okay, you have your computer, right? You have ID 1000cc injectors.
Okay.
right? ID 1000 cc injectors flow 1000 cc's at whatever 3 bar,
Okay.
right? So you tell it, high ECU, I have this injector and it flows this much fuel with 3 bar, right? So now that's all the ECU has to work with,
Right.
right? It might be able to take that data and make a linear path for it, right? But that's all it has to work with, right? So if I do a pull on that car, AFR is perfect, and then I crank the fuel pressure down or up, what's going to happen to the AFR?
It's going to change.
It's going to follow the fuel pressure,
Right.
Because it just
Now you're talking about if it's open loop.
this is an open loop injector setting. We have to start the injectors because that's the important part, right? So, so now let's do it the way I do it. So I set up my injectors on pressure delta. In other words, every injector flows differently at different pressures.
Okay.
And if you open up your little injector data sheet, it'll tell you a 2 bar, a 3 bar, a 4 bar, a 5 bar, what it is. And it's usually not linear. It usually has like differences,
Yeah.
You put all that data in, right? And you let the ECU work out that at X pressure, I flow this amount through all this different thing.
Right.
So now when I go to the fuel pressure regulator and I turn it down, there's less fuel. The computer knows this. Now there's more injector. I turn the pressure up, right? Wait, did I say there was more fuel? Less? There's less fuel when I turn it down, obviously.
Yeah.
When I turn it up, there's more fuel. I use less injector.
Right.
But then if you were to take those 3 runs and compare them on the dyno, AFR is on track on each one. There's no difference.
Right.
Right? So those are 3 perfect runs in the dyno. You have hurt nothing.
Right.
Right? So now let's add closed loop fuel to the mix, right? So now we're trying to figure out our fuel tables, right? And we're going to do everything in open loop, right? So we do a pool. It turns out it was way too rich, right?
Okay.
AFR is super rich, right? Crazy rich. All right, we pull a bunch of fuel out of it. Now we pulled too much. Things super lean, right? Okay. So now we meet in the middle, it's still lean. Now we're playing around and we're trying to figure it out, and it just isn't right, And now we finally, after 10 pulls, we have everything where it needs to be, right, according to our opinion. But what have we done on those other 9 pulls? We've done pulls where it shouldn't be.
Right.
And some of those pulls can hurt stuff.
Can hurt something. Yeah. Yeah.
So now, if you do closed loop and you have it set up properly, of course, because this is what everyone's scared. People don't know how to set it up. So what ends up happening is they get scared because it's like, oh, it's not working. It's moving too fast. It's too slow, blah, 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 blah. Assuming that it's set up correctly, I do that first pull, and you know what my AFR just did? It was perfect on target. But my correction was negative 15%. Holy shit.
Your trim. What's that? What's called? Trim?
It depends on the ECU, but we'll call it short-term fuel trim.
Right.
Short-term fuel trim is at negative 15%. What does that mean?
That means that you're...
I had to pull 15% of its calculated fuel to get there.
Right.
So you know what you do? You just go subtract 15% fuel. Guess what your next run looks like? Probably perfect.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
2 pulls. You're on the money. There you go.
Right.
Right. So you just went from having 10 pulls on the dyno to make it work. And mind you, this is like a perfect world situation. It's
And
not always.
that's also if you type in your injector data correctly.
Correct.
Also.
Right. And then I can take that same car and I can remove the vacuum line
Right.
off the fuel pressure regulator.
Right.
And guess what my AFRs do? The baseline of it is it knows that the fuel pressure isn't increasing, so it stays that injector in that realm.
Right.
And then on top of that, the closed loop is then sitting there and moving me in the right direction, so everything's where it's going to be. And I can do that all day, and my engine is just never going to have a lean condition. It's never going to have a rich condition. It's always going to be what I target at. So I can sit there and do 100 pulls and make changes and do this and that. And all I'm doing is observing the correction values.
Right.
And then you can even get a little fancier. Like what I do is I actually don't tune 0%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually tune to negative 3%.
Why is that?
Because if my sensor goes, guess what it defaults to? Open loop, and it's 3% richer. A little safer. You know what I mean?
Right. Okay.
Because now it doesn't have the ability to reference AFR anymore for engine protection.
Right.
Right. So there's a code, like the check engine light's on.
Yeah.
But if the customer so decides that they still want to, rip on it because they choose to, at least I know the whole system defaulted to a little bit rich,
Yeah.
So really matter, but if they keep at it, or they don't see the light, or maybe the bulb's broken or something, that we run into issues, So that's my mentality on it. So based on what I just explained to you, why would you ever do it the open loop method?
Now, most ECUs are capable or they have that feature?
For the most part. Yeah.
Okay, nowadays that's be the only reason I see
it's
why.
really difficult. I mean, I don't think you can do it on the Haltech Platinums. I think those are static injector settings. As of last time I played with one, Fuel Tech still static injector setting, which is the big one, and then everything is closed loop. It just depends how it behaves.
So Fuel Tech doesn't have closed loop?
Oh yeah, it does.
Okay.
Closed loop is what allows Fuel Tech to get away with what they get away with, which is being like the most basic thing of basic things and having the most like I don't want to use the word basic, but the closed loop on Fuel Tech is so good, right? Mm-hmm. That you basically don't have to work at it. I've seen Fuel Tech cars like go down the track and survive with like 30% corrections.
Damn.
But it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a bad thing because it makes everybody feel like they're a tuner.
Yeah.
It's a good thing because it keeps people from like hurting themselves.
Right.
The problem is they never learn not to.
Right.
So it kind of starts this like cycle of kind of stupidity, which is a shame. And that's one of the reasons why people argue not to use closed loop, because it's like, oh, it's not real. It's like you're, what's the word? I just had someone argue this on the internet recently for me. It's lazy. It's lazy tuning. Closed loop's lazy tuning. And you could make that argument, obviously, but it's lazy if you don't know how to use it. If you know how to use it, it's an invaluable tool.
Right.
I mean, what I explained to you makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And that also works for engine protection too, right? So Motec, Haltech, you can set trim corrections in it, right? So for going back to the injectors, I send a car off on the road.
Yeah.
Right. My fuel pressure starts dropping because my filter gets clogged. Right. So fuel pressure goes down. Right. Injectors spray more. Right. Because and closed loop after a certain amount of time has to keep adding. So 2 codes right there are triggered. My fuel pressure expected value, right? Because the ECU is expecting a certain fuel pressure. Is different from my actual fuel pressure by X amount.
Right.
There's a code. Doesn't do anything. It just tells me, hey, your fuel pressure and expected fuel pressure are 20 psi off. There's something wrong here.
Yeah.
Right. And my short-term fuel trim keeps hitting 10% plus in whatever direction.
Right. Another
code. Engine has not seen a lean or rich pull once. So I'm getting a phone call.
Yeah.
Hey, dude, engine light's on. All right, man, bring it in. Let's see what's up. And, fuel filter's clogged. Let's service it, replace it, whatever. Boom, off we go.
Yeah.
But how many times has that engine had to suffer?
Yeah.
So now let's take that same motor, no closed loop, and let's do no engine protection because we're feeling frisky.
Right.
And the phone call is, hey, man, and this is going to be funny, ready? Hey, Bert, dude, car felt awesome for the past 2 months. Now it's like smoking and it's doing all this weird stuff. Because guess what happens as the car leans out? Makes more power.
Yeah.
So I'm sure everybody has this story.
Yeah.
It felt great until it didn't.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So we went from a couple $100 quick service and diagnostic thing to $15,000, $20,000 engine project because who knows what we lost. Damn. Hopefully we just burned up a ring or piston and we can just kind of go there.
Yeah.
But what happens if that's not the case?
That's true. I mean, just make the corrections if you have closed loop, and why not just use it?
Just use it.
It's just I would.
Use it constantly. I use it all the way. I have it on constantly.
Yeah.
I never not use it. And like I said, it defaults. If the sensor goes bad, it knows and it just does its thing. And I know what it's gonna do, and there it is. I'd rather get codes and get those phone calls than I'm on the side of the road and the engine won't start and locked up or off the hole in it, whatever.
No, 100%.
Same thing with oil pressure. Same thing with EGTs, And when you start going to the big boy builds, which I recommend for yours, I also keep track of coolant pressure.
Yeah, I have all the sensors. I was not playing with that, everything.
Whatever coolant pressure you're seeing on the dyno, that's going to be your baseline because that's essentially the best case scenario, right? Use that as a threshold. I'm not saying that you need to make it an engine protection thing where like it shuts the engine off, or I would never recommend that, but put you in limp mode or whatever. Shutting the engine off is very dangerous. Never do that. Especially in a street car. That'll kill someone. But at least hey, there's warning 1, 2, 3. 1 is 5 psi over what we were on the dyno. 2 is 10. 3 is 15. By the time you get to 3, like you know something's up. And maybe have 3 be the one that just cuts you off.
Okay.
You know, same thing for crankcase pressure, right? If your ring, you know, especially with this, you know, when we build those big 1,000+ horsepower engines, they're loose on purpose, right? There's going to be a big crankcase pressure issues. You monitor what it was in the dyno, you take that as your baseline, and then you have that information to reference. You know, like if your crankcase pressure has consistently gone up 1 or 2 psi over X amount of time, and now we're like way over what we were on the dyno, guess what time it is? It's time to take the motor apart and look into it, because the next thing, the failure may not just be a $5,000 refresh.
You can sensor crankcase pressure?
Yeah, of course.
With what sensor?
Usually we use like a super low map sensor, like a 2-bar map sensor or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because we'll get vacuum because of the way we do it. Or if you're running like a dry sump, you will have vacuum.
Okay.
Right, because the dry sump's constantly pulling.
Right.
So so you do want to reference vacuum, because sometimes if you put a pressure sensor on a dry sump car, it may never read more than 0.
Yeah. Okay, I see what you're saying.
So you do want to, because if you're pulling 2-3 psi on the dyno, and then all of a sudden now on the road it's 0, well, okay, so we added 2-3 psi of pressure, of gauge pressure. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So wanted to talk about this for GT you have here, right? You're involved in this. It's the world's fastest street car, 310 miles per hour.
Yeah.
Apparently, that was the record, right?
0.8. He likes to make
0.8.
Make sure he tells people 0.8. Yeah.
Now, street car, as I mentioned before, it's not one that you see running on the salt flats like you normally see these fast.
Yeah. There's like a list. I couldn't tell you what it all is, but the basics of it is it has to have functioning AC, has to have an active registration and insurance.
Okay.
Seatbelts, obviously, and like stuff like that. And I think there's some other weird requirements by Guinness in order to actually be official. But it's basic stuff.
Yeah.
And fuel too. It has to be run on fuel that you can get at the pump. So in this case, it's an E85 car.
So it's legit street car, which is so crazy. So now, talk about what the setup is, and how you were able to kind of get involved with this and break the record, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not by any means the creator and be all of this car. I'm just the guy who's taking care of it as of now.
Yeah.
So owner of this car had a shop. They built this car for the purpose of going fast. It was like, I mean, before I started playing with it, had already been at it for like 10+ years.
Yeah.
They had gone 300 and change or something. Sorry. The car had only gone 284. That's right. It had gone 284. I knew the owner through the grapevine, and he kept asking people to help him with the car.
Yeah.
My name kept coming up. He came to me at the time. I was a big yes guy. I'm not a yes guy anymore. And I said, sure, let's do it. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
The car was on Fuel Tech. It was set up and tuned, for the most part by Jason at ATF. I made some changes to things that I thought were correct. They were gracious enough to like accept my ideas, and we made some changes to fueling and how we approach things. Jason's he's a drag quarter mile tuner. You know what I mean? It's two different things. My background in big horsepower street cars helps out a lot.
Okay.
Because my guys are on the highway in Mexico, in 5th gear, wide open throttle, 30 pounds of boost. You know what I mean? So there's two different worlds between doing that and having it last versus a quarter mile pass. You can get away with a lot more down the quarter mile than you can, in 5th gear pegged, for that extended period of time. And in this case, these runs take like 35, 40 seconds. So, so the car is a wide open throttle.
Yeah, that's a long time.
So I got involved with it. I had a dyno for it, which was the big foot in the door. That's really what they wanted me for. They just made me pretend. They made me feel like I was special, but no, they just needed my dyno. I ended up being valuable to the team and ended up working out. But yeah, we took it out with some of these changes, and the thing fucking ran 310 miles an hour out of nowhere. We just wanted 300. Damn. And he just the video's out there. It's a cool video. He almost crashed, actually.
Damn.
Yeah, because he was supposed to let off, and he didn't because he's his name is Johnny. I often ask Johnny, how do you walk? because I don't understand how a human with balls that big can physically move around. But yeah, he literally saw 300 and the brake zone was coming up, and he said, nah. He just stayed on it. He wanted more. Literally, this car stopped in the grass, I don't know, maybe like 20 yards away from the track.
Wow.
From the end of the runway, I should say.
Yeah.
It's a cool video. It's out there. Just 4GT, fastest something mile an hour. I don't know. It'll pop up on YouTube. It's pretty common.
So what is this? You know what his setup is? What motor's in there?
Yeah, it's the factory motor, factory transmission built, obviously. The transmission is basically this like Frankenstein thing that PPG from Australia put together for them years ago. The engine is literally just a factory engine with just a bunch of goodies in it. And that's it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
He wanted the car to be more streetable.
Yeah.
So we ripped the fuel tech out and put in Haltech. It's an R5 that powers it now.
Okay.
So now this car I love this compliment. When I gave him the keys back to this car, he goes, Roberto, this car hasn't ran this well since it was stock.
Wow.
And I was like, yeah. That gets me more excited than like, oh, look at all this horsepower. It's like my car starts on cold days. Yeah. But yeah, no, it really is that drivable.
Yeah.
And we have, and it's two motors we use. We use its factory motor, and then the motor that's in it now is a race motor. Okay. So how this car works is we race it with the race motor. After each run, the motor normally the motors blow up. It didn't this time around. I think I have had a little help with that. It usually blows up, the motor goes out. In this case, it didn't blow up, they just refreshed it. Yeah. And then in the meantime, for press and for going to SEMA and driving around town, we put the factory engine back in, like matching VIN. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I got a chance to do both, and that was kind of cool because he's like, yeah, the car, I can't believe that this car runs the same on the factory motor as it does on the built motor. Wow. So it's pretty cool.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, I saw it at Fuel Fest, and I was like,
I
didn't even know. Yeah,
it's a wild dude.
Yeah.
That is a wild dude.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool to see cars like this that you can drive on the street and look crazy like that. Especially at 4GT, you don't really see them too often, and they're really expensive cars. So to do that kind of record,
and he does not treat this thing like it's a priceless gem.
Yeah,
I'll show you later. There's dents on it from stripper shoes.
What?
Yeah, I have to find the picture. He has a picture with like 4 strippers on the car. Because Johnny's a wild man. He does wild stuff.
Wow. Well, shout out to Johnny. Congratulations on the record, and congratulations on the stripper shoes denting your car too, I guess. Oh man. So yeah, we didn't want to overlook that. Of course, that's pretty cool that you're involved in that. Now, I know you mentioned before. I can't forget this. You did mention that RBs are not reliable, and you strongly believe that. Now, even with everything figured out, you still feel that way.
Well, they're just it's so this is how I describe it, and I don't think I'm using the wording correctly.
Okay.
But who's the rival of the RB?
Okay, 2J. Yeah.
2J. Right. So I think the RB is by far the better engine.
Oh, I wasn't expecting you to say that.
The 2J is the better motor, though. Hardware is there. The RB will always make more power more efficiently than the 2J will, always. If I were to take the same turbo, even though it's a 2.6, let's stroke out. We'll stroke out a 2.6 to a 2.8, put a whatever turbo on it, take that exact same turbo, put it on a 2J, same boost, the RB makes more power. Every time. Difference is RB physically, hardware-wise, it can't hold the power. That's why I'm excited for these like PRP blocks and stuff.
Yeah.
Because technically speaking, if you can get an RB, and it's not really the block, it's the head. The head's what makes the power. But
yeah,
if you can get an RB block that isn't going to grenade itself with a RB26 stock head, or when I say stock head, I mean like a stock cast, or the redesigns, technically speaking, no JZ will keep up.
But what do you still have the hardware issue, no? Or you mean hardware just in terms of how it's designed?
The cast, right?
The cast.
Yeah. Okay. Once you get rid of that aspect of it, pound of boost for pound of boost, the 26 is the better motor.
So what about the cars that make? What about the 2Js that make 1,200 on? They always claim that I can make 12. You don't need much to make 1,000. Like what about those guys?
Well, it's the same thing. So imagine if the RB was that strong. The RB26 will make 1,000 horsepower with little to no effort. The issue is it can't hold it very long. The 2J will actually take more effort to make the power from like a turbo perspective, right? From an efficiency perspective, it just can take it forever. That's the difference. You know? And then, you know, and you got to be careful too, man, because when you're talking horsepower, and I'll show you some dyno graphs to like show you what I mean. Your horsepower and my horsepower are two different things.
Right.
You know, 1,000 horsepower car is just a number on the dyno. People say like, oh, I have an 800 horsepower car. Let me see the dyno graph. Why? Because that's what matters.
Yeah.
How do I know? You know, because I see it all the time. People just like slingshot boost. You know, your power band looks like a rainbow. You know, like that's not real. You know what I mean? Like, oh, cool. You spiked your torque up and got this big pretty number, and then it fell on its face because that's all that it can do. Yeah. You know, and you know your power band starts at 6,000 RPM. Good for you. You know, and that's another thing too. Like I know you were mentioning earlier, people that are like scared of like RPM and stuff. Yeah. I see that a lot too, where people don't like understand like revving and like I put this massively oversized turbo. I put this massively oversized cam. I don't spool. I make no low end torque, and my red line's at 7,000. Why? You know, turbo comes in at 6,000. Slingshots boost in, makes a pretty number, falls on its face. All the car does on the highway or on the street is go wah, wah. And I scared my dog. Sorry, buddy. You know, and sure, maybe in fifth gear, you know, you might be able to have a good time with it. Yeah. You know, but wait till you drive my wife's car.
Interesting.
That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Well, never heard anybody break that whole 2J RB thing.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
You know, and again, it's part of it is getting. I want to make 1,200. Okay, go buy the turbo rated for 1,600. Yeah. So we don't have to work as hard. Right. You know, more boost, less timing means it's safer and makes the power. Right.
That's true.
And that's the common formula. And we're gonna drive one of those cars. I have one of those here with that formula in mind. You know.
Okay. It seems to me that it seems like Florida is like the hub for RBs. Like New York is the hub for BMWs, technically. Like all the fastest guys with BMWs are from the Northeast, right? And not to say that there's other, you know, not other fast guys with BMWs in the States, but New York is the hub for it, right? Now, RBs seem to be Florida's thing, right? Now, in all of Florida, right? And this is just your opinion on what you think. I want you to be honest with me, right? And this is going to lead into my next question. Who is the king of RBs?
Is there a
in
pun
Florida?
there?
No, what do you mean?
No. Never mind.
Was there a pun?
I don't know. I thought there was a pun. Never mind.
Oh, no. But I want you to tell us on the Street Alpha podcast who you feel is the king of RBs in Florida. Or in the States. It could be in the States. Because Australia is...
That's a super easy question. I'm gonna start with that.
Okay.
But it's a different flavor. We have the first guy in the States to ever really fuck with these things, like for big power.
Okay.
And I've probably broken the second most RBs in Florida. He's broken the most. Not because he's doing anything wrong, but because he was the guinea pig. Okay. So I have to give that to Larry. Larry went, I think he went 7 seconds in an RB, like 10 plus years ago.
7 seconds.
In the S15. That S15, not that one specifically, I think he's changed the chassis, but he had a twin top mount RB26 in the drag car at one point, and I believe he went in the high sevens with it.
Damn, yeah. Sevens out here in the States is crazy.
I believe so. He'll. I mean, I could call him and ask him real quick, but obviously we're doing this. But I believe so. I could be wrong. Maybe it was 8s. I don't remember. I just remember it was at the time it was a big number. I don't follow drag racing as much as
right.
So I don't. The numbers kind of elude me to what's what. But yeah, I would say he's I mean he does a different flavor. He doesn't do it. He does more of like the bigger horsepower kind of stuff. Right. He's not as focused on like the efficiency stuff, which is cool. There's a place for that. Yeah. But it's we do our flavors are different. Yeah. But if I had to say who
let's say street cars.
Oh, I think I am at that point. I think I would say I am because I'm the only one who cares about streetability stuff. I'm one of the few guys in the States who cares about streetability stuff. I think there's one other shop that is into the streetability stuff more than me. Not more than me, but maybe
for RBs. I'm talking
for RBs.
Who's that?
I would have to say it's Doug.
Who's Doug?
Up Garage.
Oh, up garage.
He obsesses with low, mid, and torque, you know,
And V cams.
and V cams, right? Which obviously we do, but he does it, you know. He does, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the way he does it. There's a lot of things that he does that I just would never do, you know. But I mean, he's into it, you know. He likes response. He likes the cars to be, you know, street cars, you know, because that's what he does, you know, and he focuses on that, and you know the results show for themselves. So you have to give the man huge respect because it's there.
Right.
I see it. He posts dynographs. It's very obvious. You know, I've chatted with him. You know what I mean? And so it's you know the guy knows what he's doing in that regard, and he appreciates that.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people just appreciate the dyno number.
Right.
You know,
100%.
You know,
that's how they use that.
He's more of like, you know, low mid end guy.
Okay.
I want as much low mid end as I can get with the top end.
Right.
So there we separate paths. So my cars are still big horsepower, but as efficient as possible. You know, and he's also not as big a fan of like all the safeties and all the stuff that I do. They think it's, you know, they call it Australian brainwashing or something or whatever. But that's fine. It's okay to have an opinion. You know what I mean? So
100%. Now, this is the one thing that I've noticed with RBs is that there aren't too many shops that, and I don't want to speak bad about anybody, right? But it's hard to find a good shop that knows how to build an RB. Why do you think that is?
it's the same reason it's hard to find a good shop to build anything is because most shops are catalog builders.
Okay.
What they do is you go in there and that you go, let's pretend that you have no idea what you want. Let's just, you have car A, you want horsepower B. What can you do for me? You know, especially if the shop has like a service writer-esque kind of thing going on where you're not actually talking to the artist. You're just kind of talking to the guy that's going to then talk to the guy that's going to do the grunt work. That's but there really isn't, you know, it's the shop is tailored more like a business and like an art form kind of thing, or like a, you know, because that's what this is. This is art. You know, this just, it's not trying to be gay about it, but we're just a bunch of artists, you know.
Yeah.
They're going to do the same thing. They're just going to sit there. They're going to go on turn 14. They're going to put your year, make, and model and see what's available for it.
Right.
You know, sure, you know, AMS makes this turbo kit and HKS makes this and Radium makes that and all this stuff. And there's no real rhyme or reason because they've never done it, you know?
Yeah.
And they're just going to slap a bunch of parts together. They're going to get you in the dyno. You're going to get one of those 45-minute tuners and you're going to, you know, just have a thing and hopefully it works out. And chances are it won't because as we know, these are very finicky engines. Yeah. And that's probably what happens to most people is that. And I'm not saying they're doing a bad job. I'm just saying that that, you know, that's just what happens.
Yeah.
You know? There's the flips. There's also the people that may be something like me where they're just like, you know, it's because I keep it small for a reason. I try to do more guys, and all I ended up doing was just pissing myself off and the customers off. You know?
Yeah.
I am huge into like customer retention. I hate losing customers, right? I've lost like 2, you know, and it was stupid stuff. And all of it was because I was trying to do way too much at once.
Okay.
You know, and I have pissed off people that I had no business pissing off.
Okay.
They were good customers, good people. They knew exactly what they wanted. And because I was too, you know, trying to figure out everything that's happening around me, you know, myself and the guys dropped the ball. And that's when I was like, I cannot. I mean, I made it right, obviously.
Right.
You know, you go back and you make it right. But you know, balls have been dropped, and they've all been dropped because of just having way too much going on at once.
Yeah.
So even if you find someone like me who just has a little guy, not doing anything crazy, stuff like that, you also have to take into consideration the skill to confidence ratio.
Right.
Which is huge. A lot of guys here in Florida have this much confidence, and I won't. The skill level won't show up on the camera. And we'll drive one of those cars today. I have one with me, and what it is, they just throw shit at cars, man. There's no rhyme or reason.
Yeah.
Oh, the biggest cams. Oh, the biggest turbo. Oh, the this and this.
Yeah.
And then what do you end up with? A boring car that does at 6,000 RPM.
Yeah. No, I hear you. I'm actually a victim of a bad situation with the shop. So I have a good sense for knowing when it's getting in and when it's going in a direction. Early on too, you can kind of tell. But I can say this for people who are watching this, just make sure you guys do your research. Do as much research as you can before you go to a shop. And the main reason I'm saying that is because when I first started with RBs, I thought I knew a lot, and I really didn't. And the things I didn't know, I trusted the builder to know, or the person who's running the shop to know. And once things started to seem a little weird, like when I was like, well, I spoke to 3 different people who build RBs, and you're telling me something different. You never built an RB before, like something's off. Once I started getting that vibe, at that point, I kind of started pulling back a little bit and kind of doing more of research and kind of trying to get my car out of the shop. So if you feel something's off, maybe ask around first to some reputable shops, call them up, figure it out, and then kind of assess the situation and say, maybe it's not best to continue with this build at that shop. But just don't keep going forward and trusting people, because that's how you get burned. And a lot of people end up, like you said, confidence is what sells. And if that person has scammed people before, chances are their confidence up here because they know how to speak and they know how to manipulate situations and kind of get what they want.
And they're not all bad people. Some of them,
100%.
Some of them are just literally just too dumb for their own good.
Yeah.
They're just, the confidence is just such an engraved thing with them. I mean, I tell people like basics when you're looking for a shop, you know?
Right.
Is it a real business?
Yeah.
You know, hey, how do I pay? You know, oh, everything has to be Zelle or cash. That's a red flag. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, they don't have like a legitimate business license. You know, like that's, you know, that's going to probably be the best deal you can get.
Right.
But that might not be the thing. There's no repercussion if they mess up, you know? Another one is like you said, like talk to the people around them, like look at their finished work. Is that what you're looking for? You know, and also keep in mind, if they're bringing anything to the table, right, that's not just the usual mouth diarrhea. You know? So like, did they just go watch the same YouTube video that you watched yesterday? That
literally
the same Motive DVD video about all the things, and now they're just going through the talking points to impress you. You know?
Yeah.
You know, like I think I confused you when I told you about the like cement stuff.
Oh, with what?
Like filling the blocks and stuff.
Yeah, what about it?
I'm saying people always look at me like, what? You do what to them?
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
I think I said
yeah.
that to you, and you're like, what do you mean? You know?
Yeah.
You know,
well, you had a video on that.
I did.
And I did, with the RB26, I did hear about that. But when you solidified it, I was like, oh, okay, cool. But then the RB30 was a little bit, I guess they fill it a little bit, maybe more or less or something like that.
Yeah, you do
less.
less. Yeah.
But yeah, like things like that. When you start asking those kind of questions, and it's like, well, this is what these guys are doing. Why aren't we doing that? Oh, you don't need people who know how to manipulate know how to come up with answers on the spot.
Right.
So
right, yeah.
you'll catch on to that. So just beware of people like that. Always do your research. And always ask guys who are reputable, like you know, Roberto or some other, you know, 2J shops.
Also, don't assume I'm reputable just because I'm on this camera. You know what I mean? This could
No,
all be
100%,
this could all be a
100%.
giant scam. Keep that in
yeah.
mind. You know, like just do your research.
Yeah.
You know, which I know it doesn't mean much nowadays, but it's just there's ways out there of figuring out
100%.
if someone's actually going to get you what you want. You know, and it's typically not by social media.
Well, for you, it was. For me, the only reason that I ended up reaching out to you is because you had data on the video.
But you reached out.
Yeah.
That's the
but
thing.
you had data.
Right, yeah,
Because
of course,
there was on the forums, people say all these things, and it's like, all right, well, who's telling the truth? You had data. You had actual data to prove that the oil pressure was dropping. So I was like, all right, this guy's definitely not just talking at his ass to get clicks and views. And you also didn't seem like you cared much about you. Well, not even just social media. It also seemed that you didn't really care much about trying to get people to come and check you out. It was more of like you were strictly sticking to like, it's an informative. This is what's happening. This is the information I'm putting out, and that's what I appreciated mostly.
You know why I made those videos, right?
Why was that?
I got tired of answering the question. It's just a lot easier to send a link. Watch this video. Call me back in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just so much easier.
That's why I gave that vibe then, because it's like
oh
you were
my
just
God.
like, I'm just putting this information out there. I don't care for all this, you know, drama.
Yeah, I'm
YouTube
sitting
stuff.
there. The camera's all grainy because I didn't know how to set like the whatever settings. I didn't even care. I just need this information out there so that I can just quick link people a video. You know,
but you did. It was in there. The information, the polls, the cars, the everything. So, people like myself, I appreciate that because it's not just BS being spewed on the internet, right?
One thing I want to say, I don't know if I said this already, but I don't think we kept the conversation going on what I recommend for people with Skylines.
With
Like when you first get a car, maybe talk. Either I'll say it again if anything, but when you first get a car, you know, you whether or not get one of these, please.
Oh,
Don't not necessarily this one. You can get something cheaper or something, whatever.
When
but
you first get a Skyline.
a Skyline,
Okay.
please. It's God, man, the amount of people that we get that just burn up these cars because they go buy it from whoever, and then the next day they're doing is flooring it and going crazy with it. Like we work with a lot of importers.
Okay.
Whether it's, I think I mentioned, with maintenance or just souping them up or just adding a little bit of insurance policy to it. A lot of importers will bring us like these things, these big, $100,000, $200,000 cars. We'll throw basic ECU packages in them just so that when they sell it, they don't like become a problem.
Okay.
But actually, this car's a good example. I actually just baseline this as is super lean. This thing wouldn't have lasted very long.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
This is for I believe he plays football or something. But either way, he
Oh,
just
really?
purchased the car. He wants to just look over, and we're gonna throw one of these guys
This
in
thing
it.
is so nice.
Add a little bit of insurance for him, some more. It'll probably make it made like $550, which is probably what it's gonna make. But it's gonna be a safe $550. He's actually gonna be able to take the car out and not worry about
Anything,
right, which would have happened.
Right.
So that's just advice that I always give to people. It doesn't really matter what car it is, whether you're buying a JDM Sylvia or 300ZX or RX-7.
Yeah.
Find someone that can tune it, please, because that's the main issue we see here with people that buy these cars. And it's a really sad story because it is you go and especially if you got to take out a loan or something to a $30,000, $40,000 car just to get a week enjoyment out of it for it to blow up and scrounge up the money to fix it. And you know what everyone does after that? They sell
They
it.
sell it. That's it.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And we see it all the time. It's one of those things that makes me feel bad because they are cool cars. They're really cool cars. They just take a little bit of effort to just get them, especially bringing them here in the States. Japan's not so bad because people don't treat cars as badly as we do. And also Japan has a lot more maintenance base than we are.
Okay.
We're a lot more casual with maintenance.
Yeah. 100%. I haven't changed my oil in about 6 months.
Yeah. Well,
Should probably do that. Yeah. No, I'm kidding. I just got oil change. But normally in the daily people just drive. They don't really keep up on top of it.
That's my advice. I don't know if it was said or not. I just like to bring it out there. And we, and like I said, we also do provide support for shops.
Okay.
Because we only work on cars in our group at the moment. So we have our car club-ish kind of setup. And the way that we work is you buy either a stock car from us or bring a stock car, and then we do a build package on it. We don't, at the moment, do any sort of off the street mechanical work, clutches, brakes, any of that stuff. That's just not our gig. We send that to other people that do that. But we do support people. All we ask is that you buy the parts and stuff from us.
Okay.
So we do this for a lot of shops all over the country. Hey, Roberto, I have a customer with an R33 GTR. He wants to make 500, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, hey, man, do this, this, and this. Here's a base map. Fire it up. Put on the dyno. Let's make sure everything's good. Here you go. Everybody's happy.
Right.
So we do provide that if there are people out there who are interested in just what we spoke about, which is having a setup that you can feel good about going on the road in.
Right. Awesome. So how do we get in contact with you? What is the best way to, reach out to you if they want to work with you or if they want to find out some information? What are those outlets we can reach you?
Email. I don't usually get to them until pretty late at night. So you're probably going to have a message from me at 1 o'clock in the morning because that's usually when I'm there reading emails.
Yeah.
My phone number's out there. People can contact me.
Okay.
I do have a rule though. If you call me back to back more than 3 times, I will block your number. That is so frustrating. Don't do that. Oh my gosh. I don't want people to do that. I'm not Walmart.
More than 3 times is crazy.
It happens all the time. And they're always stupid stuff. Like, hey, do you have a hood for my 96 Honda? I'm like, what? Why are you calling me, man? How did you even, because I guess on Google for some reason, sometimes we pop up as used car parts or something and people, but whatever. Don't call me 3 times in a row. I will block your number.
Crazy.
But I usually pick up. If I don't, I'll text. And, I'm usually pretty good about helping people out. So, like I said, we don't take on work unless it's big projects. But if you do need a part or advice on certain things, I'm more than happy to help. I'm not saying I'm the guy to get advice from, but we have a pretty good track record of things not breaking. So if I can't help, I will help.
Awesome. Hopefully this podcast can answer a lot of the questions that people typically have about RBs. There's some other things we probably didn't speak about in terms of different heads and RB25s and so on. But I mean, I'm sure we can say that for another time, or maybe we can actually plug it in for maybe the drive along video or something like that.
Yeah. Keep it going.
Figure it out. But I do appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, man.
I'm actually glad that you wanted to be a part of this because I know you're a busy guy. and you're not really big into social media and stuff like that. But for me, having the multiple conversations that we've had, I figured it'd be best to kind of share it with the world. That way people who are into RBs or Skylines, they can get the best information out as possible on the internet at least. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it. If you guys want to work with Roberto or Rap Performance, make sure you guys reach out to him, contact him through email, phone number like you said, or maybe even social media. I'm not sure if you answer DMs or anything like that.
As far as answering things, I'm a one-man show.
One-man show, okay.
So you got to give me a little buffer time. I may respond right away because you happen to catch me while I was on Instagram or something. Yeah. It may be a tomorrow thing. Just, email is the best though, because email, my wife yells at me if I don't answer them. So.
All right. Well, there you guys have it. Make sure you guys hit that like button if you're watching the premiere right now, and also make sure you subscribe. And lastly, make sure you guys cop some GTR merch. This is from GTR Festival that we had dropped this. So hit the link down below in the description or on the bottom left or right in the Shop Now button to purchase your GTR Street Alpha merch. Until next time, guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.